Hello, everyone. We at ASEI hope you are all doing very well, and back in India or wherever your folks are, they are also staying safe and doing well. Today, we have the AI Summit, a very active session for 3 more hours. So, for artificial intelligence, the experts will guide you. And of course, you would know better that initially we thought artificial intelligence was going to replace natural ones, but now we find out that it's just going to complement it. So all for AI. Before we set forth on that path, let me cover a few housekeeping tips. This is a webinar, so the audience will be muted and their videos will be turned off. So please don't struggle to unmute yourself or start your video. But we do want an active participation from you. So please feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat and the Q&A box. As you can see on the screen, be amongst the first 20 to join the live audience, which you already have on today, for a chance to win 5 early bird giveaways. And also submit your questions in advance via Twitter at ASEI USA and engage with us with the hashtag ASEI or AI Summit. These are the prizes. There are prizes for the most interesting questions raised, and also most engaged participants will win one of the 10 giveaway books. So be engaged, be active, be agile. This webinar is being recorded, and it will also be available in our YouTube channel. We at present are live on our YouTube channel as well. So we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your friends. Please also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get our updates on a regular basis. Let me now hand over to Divya Ashok, our Silicon Valley board member, a vibrant vice president strategy and innovation at Salesforce, and an advocate of women and children empowerment. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you, Vatsala. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I have the honor of introducing our national president, Piyush Malik. Apart from being the national president, which is in itself a huge role, he has founded several teams in the past and has been responsible for the digital transformation of several customers, helping them in their journey on the AI first and cloud first transformations. Today, he's a senior vice president at Spring ML, which is a Google partner startup. And apart from all of this, he has had tons of experience at IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers, leading global teams of thousands and across several continents. He's an alum of IIT Delhi with a master's in management of technology. And of course, he has an engineering background. He's lived in the Silicon Valley for 25 years and is a very compassionate member who believes in serving nonprofit organizations like the ASEI. Piyush, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Divya. Welcome, everyone. Today is a special day, not only because it is the AI Summit, but also of the successes that we had in space. So for many of you who are like me and grown up with the fantasies of space travel, looking at Star Trek or Star Wars movies, Star Trek episodes used to come every Sunday when I was a kid. And I hope that brings some memories in your mind. Today, of course, we are celebrating our successes in advancement in artificial intelligence. And as Divya said, and Vatsala mentioned earlier as well, artificial intelligence is not going to take away your jobs. It's going to augment. Yes, there are things which are going to change. So today's summit is mainly about bringing in diverse perspectives from our various speakers, and many of them have written books, and we will hear from them. But to set the stage, I've got a small presentation that I would like to share. So if I can bring my screen, give me a second and I will be here. All right. So I obviously come from the enterprise world where I have helped clients move on to their artificial intelligence journey through the use of technology, through the use of emerging technologies like AI, IoT, and so on and so forth. But it's predicated on certain facts such as data. Data being available, computing power being available as well. So to give you a full perspective, a rounded perspective of AI, I want to just get started here. So hang on tight and put on your belts, because as we celebrate the human missions that keep going to space, and as we are getting ready to go into space, into Mars, and perhaps one day colonizing Moon and another planet, we are thrilled that the science fiction writers and the imagination of movie producers is coming to life. And in part, that is because of the human nature to explore and go boldly where no man has gone before. Now, look around you. AI is everywhere, whether you realize it or not. Many of the youngsters today who are in the audience, we have student members, they will realize these things as commonplace. But for folks of a previous generation, they see a vast difference between the technology jumping from one generation to another. And you can, whether it is the voice-enabled agents that we have in our phones, or whether it is the robotic cleaner, which automatically cleans your floor at home. We definitely have seen the takeover of AI and autonomous things in our life. So we can easily say AI is eating the world. And one thing is, despite all the warning signs and sirens being sounded by very famous people, these there have been detractors from the AI movement. But then the doomsday prophecies are out there, but the researchers haven't stopped working. The implementers, the practitioners haven't stopped implementing either. And that's what we will see how things have happened in the enterprise. Now, the movies may project Terminator-like scenarios in science fiction movies, but there are things that have happened in this last 70 years of the history of computing, and especially around AI, and we tend to call them as AI winters when things don't happen as per the plan. And despite those winters and booms, now we are in that stage where it is the boom number 3 of machine learning, which is being driven since 2010s. And you can see autonomous cars, you can see various events which have happened, especially around 2010, 2011, when IBM Watson essentially playing a game defeated human beings. That was the coming of age of the machines. Now, since then, there have been a lot of competitions that have been won by machines. Human beings have been defeated at various games, but games are only a way to represent how a computer system can show their advancements. And it also generates interest in amongst the common masses. Practically speaking, there are things like the self-driving cars and fueled by organizations such as DARPA, funding from the US government and defense research. SpaceX was formed by a foundation for providing incentive to do more research in emerging areas. And so combined with public-private partnerships, we have been able to make advancements from research to practical life in AI. And there are some perspectives I want to share, and there are 4 waves of AI, they say. In 1998, in the year that was the first year of first wave of internet, AI had started getting in there. Google and Amazon and a lot of Chinese clone companies are shown with their logo over there. Then the business AI came. So how AI started infiltrating in the business companies like Palantir, who are secretive, yet they contribute a lot in terms of advancements in defense and research. Then the wave 3, the perception AI, digitized physical world, and devices like Amazon Echo. Again, 2011 was a momentous year for AI. As I said, Jeopardy game played by IBM Watson was won by the machine, and that gave imagination a further fuel. And since 2015, we are in the era of autonomous AI with Tesla's self-driving and full self-driving ambition. Waymo, Uber, all of these companies are going towards that, using more advancement, more money that they have in the bank, and pulling that into research. Why did this happen? The 5 things that made these happen are availability of massive data. I mean, data has always been available, but making that data available and classifying, tagging it properly, making that data available for a domain to be researched, finding patterns using the computing power that was made available through the cloud. Computing power is, something which we all know that is needed, but the way cloud computing has transformed AI, that's tremendous. And above all, the AI experts, the researchers. And that brings me to name certain individuals who have had a seminal contribution in the field of AI, and starting from the early researchers. And I want to make sure I mention with the blue arrow out here, Dr. Raj Reddy. He's the only Indian and the first Asian to ever get a Turing Award in AI. And these are the pioneers, some of the others who started getting recognized for their work in AI, starting from Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy, and last, I would say in 2018 was the last year where we had Jeff Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and Jan LeCun, again, representing various universities and companies who went on to win this award. So, and of course, earlier this year, Dr. Raj Reddy, who's one of our ASCI recognized folks as well, he was recognized and inducted into the Computer History Museum as a lifetime achievement fellow. And we are very proud to call him as one of our own. And it's an inspiration to all of us Indo-Americans that we have one such AI pioneer amongst us. So as we talk about AI, we hear about a number of technologies. We hear about machine learning. We hear about things in neural networks, pattern recognition, natural language processing, and so on and so forth. But you won't learn all of these in this small summit. What you will hear is how certain aspects of AI are being put to use for the society, are being put to use for humanity. And there are certain, one segment where we will go deeper into the technology. But overall, this is a very high level discussion, think tank approach. So in summary, from the game playing Watson to GPT-3 and AlphaFold in 2020, and AlphaFold was something that came out of Google, where they were able to solve decades old problem using AI and explain in how the proteins fold. And that is something which I'm very, very excited about, because that becomes the base for further innovations in biotechnology, in biosciences, especially as we are dealing with this COVID situation. The vaccines wouldn't have been developed if it wasn't for all those advancements in computing and AI that things have happened. So moving on to something specific which impacts us in the enterprise. Deep learning definitely makes wave, but it's things like speech transcription, which comes handy in enterprise situations. When you are dealing with modernizing your contact center, where your contact center folks need to analyze how the tonality of somebody's who's irate, who's calling in, and that call needs to be handled in a proper manner. That call needs to be routed, and AI is able to impact there. That's a great accomplishment and a way to make lives better in the enterprise. There are other examples where things like object detection can help. We've done certain engagements with a city government where the potholes in the road were identified just by the images that were taken by a camera fitted inside the state transport bus. And by doing the video analytics, and you are able to identify where the potholes are, workflow happens and it gets notified, and the roads can be repaired much faster. And that's a perfect example of how AI can help in civil society. There are cases that we have seen in sports, bad calls being called during sporting events. And there've been calls to say, why can't we have an AI easily make a judgment whether the ball went out of the court or was in? And so, of course, if you ever see cricket, you have seen a lot of these technologies being implemented and real-time statistics being shown on your screen. So it's not exactly AI per se, which is predicting, but yes, it is definitely giving us a better viewing experience. In the enterprise, there is a big push towards automation, process automation or robotic process automation, which enables companies to be more efficient. It enables organizations to take away the mundane tasks that human beings or the workers perform to be performed by automated means, whereby reducing the cost of operations as well as increasing, perhaps freeing up the human beings to do much more intelligent, much more interesting work. Likewise, the virtual assistants, we talked about Siri and we talked about Google Assistant and Cortana. Those are virtual assistants. Now, if they are integrated within the call centers, if they are integrated within the working environment, it can make the life of a normal worker much more efficient. Similarly, the recommendation system, and we saw one stat earlier in the previous slide where the Netflix organization, how they use a recommender system, and one stat said 75% of their recommendations are considered very good by their viewers, and that has contributed to the growth of the company. Amazon, for example, they have been able to measure 25% growth by use of their recommender system, which is a type of AI within their product, and be able to target the right audience for the right message. Cybersecurity in general, the hackers are getting more and more sophisticated, but it's the AI that our companies deploy to make sure their perimeters are safe, to make sure that the firewalls are safe. That's what will keep us there. While we are talking about decision support systems in the enterprise, I think we have all been in situations where we've applied for loans and the credit application gets approved in almost no time, as opposed to olden days when it used to take a lot of time. And there is a lot of AI at work there. And while there is AI and you are at the risk of being rejected, there are fears that there are biases induced while programming that you can basically skew the system. And for that reason, there's increased thrust on producing ethical AI. And that said, we will have a detailed discussion towards the end of this conference on ethical AI. And I want to highlight one important use case, which I think is seen in manufacturing very often in the enterprise, which is being able to predict when a particular component will fail, whereby a costly, huge machine might fail. You can see a truck out there. These are massive trucks where if the part is replaced ahead of being failed, you can really reduce the expenses that the company has to make or the losses that they have to undergo. And so these are some of the use cases that we have actually been able to implement, working with some of our technology partners. And with that, I want to move and give you an idea of what's in store for rest of the session here. So after me, we'll have Vilas Dhar, president of Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, talk about how we are working together in terms of advancing AI for the society. We'll have Lack from Google. He will talk about AI for good. There will be a talk from Dr. Raj Ramesh. He will talk about AI and you. What does it imply? What does the future hold for you and me as AI takes away our jobs? And to get deeper in where and rubber meets the road when you see the technology in action. So we'll hear from another author, my friend Ashish Bansal, who will talk about natural language processing. And but as I said, the three women who will be leading the charge for ethics, Bala and Sindhu and Bianca, they will come towards 12:15. But to complete the plenary section, after the message from Vilas, we'll hear from Sundar, Dr. Venkatraman Sundarajan, and he's a fellow at World Economic Forum, and he will give his message as well. So with that, let me hand it over to a message from Vilas.
Hello, my name is Vilas Dhar, and I'm so thrilled to speak with the ASCI community today. This is a community that, as I've learned, represents scientists, engineers, technologists, entrepreneurs, and visionaries, and taken together, perhaps also architects of our shared digital future. I'm a computer scientist and a bioengineer by training, but my own work in technology goes far earlier. I remember even as a very young boy, going to visit my own grandfather with the latest gadgets, the latest toys and technology, and sitting with him as I tried excitedly to explain to it how it worked. But my grandfather would always ask me the same question. He'd say, I'm not so fussed about how it works, but tell me how it improves the lives of the people around us in my community, in my country, and in the world we live in today. I've taken that lesson and held it with me the entire career that I've had, first as a technologist and then as a lawyer, and now in my current role as the president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, a 21st century philanthropy that seeks to provide both grant funding and support to enable a new vision of what AI and data science might mean for society. We think not just about the use of tools, but the creation of them. How we bring together those who are setting out to solve some of the world's greatest challenges around climate, around increasing food production, around delivering healthcare to the most vulnerable, and empower them with the tools of data science and artificial intelligence in ways that let them be not just more effective, but also more integrated into the community that we're building together. In that work, I bring a lens as a technologist to understand what the products are, what it is that data science allows us to understand about the world around us. But I also bring my skills as an engineer to understand how systems are constructed, to think about where power lies, where capital lies, where innovation lies, and to think of new ways to bring incentives and behavioral changes that let all of our various talents come together in pursuit of a single shared common vision. We've seen a number of these exciting examples already emerging. With one of our partners called the Himalayan Cataract Project, we're seeing how an organization that sets out as its core mission to cure blindness around the world can use the tools of data science to build a new global common data standard, to bring together both engineers and organizations who are working on ophthalmologic health, to say, let's build new mechanisms of triaging patients, of delivering care at the right point, and of making sure that we can understand and track and evaluate how those interventions have succeeded and how they've actually restored sight to many and a common vision to all of us. As a foundation, not only do we think about building products, but we think about how we create a more diverse technology workforce. One that reflects not just diversity across many different dimensions, but brings to bear the lived and intersectional experiences of those who face problems and challenges in the world all around us, and are able to bring those experiences, sometimes of struggle, often of victory and triumph, to the design of new products. And I think communities like ASEI can play a particular and special role in that. As we think about how we build products, not just that highlight the very best of what AI can do, but also outline what it is that artificial intelligence should do. I speak not just of products that allow us to connect better through AI-enabled social media, or that allow us as consumers to better engage with products because systems know more about our consumer preferences, but about those tools of artificial intelligence that allow us to be more creative, to learn in more effective ways because systems can become better participants in our educational journey, of AI-enabled systems that allow us as patients to better navigate health systems, to understand where care is possible, to understand how we might access better and more diverse resources so that we're not following simple preordained pathways, of how we might communicate more effectively with systems and with each other through AI personal agents, through mechanisms of data sharing and data protection that allow us to both be ourselves and to have control of how we are seen in the world. I spoke at the beginning of this session by saying we're all architects. And what does it mean to be an architect through the creation of new technologies? In many ways, it's a combination both of having a vision for what the final and end product will be, but also bringing the technical capacity to bear to actually create that vision. And so as I speak to a group of incredible technologists who are focused on these issues of both how we build and what we build in order to effectuate that great future, I want to leave you with a small call to action. To think about how in your particular knowledge of a particular engineering challenge, of a systems design problem, of creating a new tool or mechanism, how are you bringing your own lived experience to that challenge? How are you thinking about how your expertise might advance our common welfare? I think often of nonprofits that work in communities that often struggle to get basic access to tools and technologies that will help them become more effective. To understand how data can restructure their systems and their approaches, and most importantly, how they can equip them to be most effective in delivering services to those they wish to serve. So I ask you all as engineers to think about how in your own communities you might support nonprofit organizations, about how you might bring a prism and a question that asks, how can this technology be created for the betterment of humanity? And most importantly, how you bring principles of ethical design that incorporate an understanding of the vulnerability, but also of the opportunity that technology poses. I'm an incredible technology optimist. I've traveled over the world. I come from a diverse background. I'm very proud to be part of a diaspora that here in the United States plays such a prominent role, both in the creation and in the use of positive technologies. But I also recognize the immense responsibility that we hold as engineers to make sure that as we continue to shape the future of technology, we do it both for the right purposes and for the right outcomes. And so with that, I will welcome you, each and every individual here, to step in and to partner with us as we think about how civil society and technology, academia and the private sector come together to develop a shared vision for an AI-enabled future, an ethical society, a just and equitable one that's powered by technology, but centered around humans. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the luck.
Thank you, Vilas. And this is a powerful message of support from the president of Patrick J. McGowan Foundation to ASCI as we work towards our shared vision for AI-powered yet human-centric ethical endeavors for the benefit of society as we explore the future of meaningful work through youth empowerment at ASCI. As you know, we do a lot of programs for youth as well as for getting them the exposure to the world. But I was so thrilled to see recent science fairs that we judged. Out of 1,000 entries that our team in Silicon Valley looked at, there were more than 70% of those submissions had AI ML infused in them. And we have recognized several of those students. And as you know, ASCI provides scholarships and encourages students by giving them prizes. So I would end here by saying AI holds the promise of making organizations, and by analysts figure 40% more efficient by 2035, unlocking estimated $14 trillion of new economic value. But as AI's transformative potential has become clear and is becoming clearer by the day, so have risks posed by unsafe or unethical AI systems. And the recent discussions around facial recognition being used to target a certain segment of the population, to discriminate against them, that's concerning. And so automated decision-making and the controversies around that, and the COVID-19 tracking and have shown that realizing AI's potential requires a strong buy-in from all segments, all citizens and governments, based in their trust that AI is being built and used ethically. There may be detractors, but I want to project the sense of optimism and hope in technology. As a man of science and as a man of engineering, I want to make sure we give everyone an opportunity to a just society by using the technologies in the right manner. So I would now transition into the next section of the plenary by introducing another good friend here, Dr. Sundar Sundareswaran, who is a fellow at World Economic Forum. Let me read his introduction. So Sundar is an AI fellow at WEF, where he is co-creating a governance framework with a multi-stakeholder community for the use of chatbots. And these chatbots are specifically in healthcare that he's focused on. He represents Mitsubishi Holding Corporation in his role at the Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And Sundar obviously is a seasoned technologist with research and development, P&L, and executive leadership experience. He has a master's degree in natural language understanding, which is within the AI realm. And he has a PhD in computer vision, and a technology that we see increasingly useful in today's world. Sundar has made numerous research contributions in robotics, neural networks, human-computer interaction, virtual and augmented reality, and autonomous vehicles. And prior to taking leadership roles in advancing technology production facilities, he's been working extensively. So he's obviously passionate about responsible deployment of novel technologies. And with that, welcome, Sundar, and welcome to our partnership with WEF. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Piyush. Let me bring up my charts here. Greetings, everyone. As Piyush mentioned, my name is Sundar. I'm a fellow at the Artificial Intelligence team in the World Economic Forum. In that team, we are developing tools for the ethical use of AI, which I will talk about. And as Piyush mentioned, I represent Mitsubishi Chemical Holdings in this role. So let me start by sharing with you a little bit about the World Economic Forum. I'm sure most of you know about it, but just in case, World Economic Forum is an international organization for public-private cooperation, founded in 1970 by Professor Klaus Schwab, whose photograph is shown on the right here. It's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And it's actually most well-known for the annual Davos meeting, which is held in Switzerland in January every year. It's an exclusive meeting of world leaders from government and business sectors. CEOs, prime ministers, presidents give addresses there. And more importantly, it has become a platform for critical conversations. For example, there was the Davos Declaration between Greece and Turkey, South African conversations, as well as the German unification meetings happened there. So this has become a platform for what Piyush referred to as people from different sectors. So we call them stakeholders. It's a multi-stakeholder approach. So how does this work? So as a platform for multi-stakeholder cooperation, the thing that the World Economic Forum does best is to bring these people together in conversations, such as in Davos, the annual meeting of new champions, the various level 1 events, big events like those. And you see the kind of people who participate on the right side of the screen, people from civil society, such as this organization, ASEI, business, government, academia, and so on and so forth. So these folks come together to discuss key issues, just like AI and other issues, to create an impact and shape the global agenda on these topics. So that's what is done by the World Economic Forum. So to look at the kind of issues, the platforms that are hosted by the World Economic Forum, you can see them here. They span the kind of things that you would think about when you think about global economy, manufacturing and production, healthcare, investing, energy, consumption, monetary systems, mobility. On the right-hand side, I have grouped a few of them together that have a very special property because they are focused on technology governance in AI, in blockchain, in IoT, robotics, and in data policy. These 4 technology governance areas together have come together as a center for the 4th Industrial Revolution, because these are termed as 4th Industrial Revolution areas, notably by Professor Klaus Schwab himself. So what are these centers for the 4th Industrial Revolution? They act as hub for multi-stakeholder cooperation, as I mentioned, and it was founded in 2017, headquartered in the Presidio in San Francisco. And there are sibling centers in Mumbai, Beijing, and Tokyo, with 13 affiliate centers all over the world. So what do we do in this? And I'm going to narrow it down to the AI topic now. As we talked about, as Piyush presented, AI is everywhere in your cell phones, in your car, in your vacuum cleaners, in the recommendations you get from Amazon and Netflix. So it's appearing everywhere, and it has a huge potential. I mean, I am with Piyush, I'm also an optimist. Tremendous positive opportunities. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we pay attention to the negative consequences, the ethical, legal, and societal issues. And so we have to come together to make sure that while AI is benefiting us, it's not hurting at the same time. And that's the purpose of the group that I work in. The vision of our team is to create an AI system that embraces the multi-stakeholder model, so the voice from all parts of the ecosystem, working for progress, people on the planet, and to ensure that we have an AI in the future that's enabling, responsible, inclusive, human-centered, and global. And you can see on this chart the numbers that I won't talk to each of them, but the numbers represent the people and the organizations that are working with us at the World Economic Forum to make this future possible. So how do we make sure that impact is achieved because of these conversations? We work with governments to enable them to safeguard citizens from harms posed by AI, but at the same time making sure that the positive benefits are realized. Working with businesses, digital transformation that Piyush spoke about, to bring together corporate leaders to understand how to responsibly deploy the AI tools within the organization and outside their organizations. And finally, last but not least, society. We work with them to ensure that AI technology is developed in ethical ways to benefit everyone in society. So here are some examples of our recent work. On the left side is apologies. On the left side is an example of how we highlight best practices. And this is important because we not only have to make sure that things are done right, but also at the same time recognize those that are doing it right. So we publish reports on the responsible use of technology by Microsoft, IBM, and others. Governance frameworks, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute because it pertains to the project that I'm working on. Use cases, facial recognition, for example, can discriminate against people. So how do we put responsible limits on how it's used? I'll speak briefly about it in a minute. Toolkits for example, board members of companies on how they can deploy AI within their companies in a way that is powerful and responsible. And finally, piloting these kind of network toolkits and frameworks with governments to see how we can reimagine regulation in the age of AI. So this is an eye chart. I won't obviously read through it, but you can see the kind of partners we have that come together on this platform to have these productive discussions. There are partners on the left half of this chart. There are typically large companies from all over the world. Global innovators in the middle of the chart. Those are typically small and medium enterprises that are doing innovative things. Tech pioneers that are starting to do innovative things, as well as in the bottom right corner, you can see foundation partners like Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, Vilas, who spoke before me. He is an incredible partner to us, and he has actually given a considerable funding to this platform to start a new alliance called the Global AI Action Alliance that you will hear more about in the future. Let me narrow down to 3 topics. First, facial recognition. What are we doing in this? Facial recognition is very powerful because it can make things easier for us to do. For example, a lot of airports globally are deploying facial recognition systems now to do what is called as flow management. Flow management is when you check in, you're using a passport and somebody has to check it. If you can use your facial recognition technique, then you can actually get through more people in a given amount of time. So you can actually manage the flow better. But at the same time, you have to worry about, are you discriminating against people when you do that? There is this well-known case study from MIT on how facial recognition systems preferentially recognize and track light-skinned people compared to brown and dark-skinned people. So this team is working on creating an audit framework that is specifically targeted at this airport use application. And this will allow the airports, when they're deploying facial recognition systems, to check to make sure if they are doing it in a way that doesn't create discrimination, bias, and all these other negative consequences. They are currently working with all great big airports, for example, with the Narita in Tokyo and the airports in France, and so on and so forth. Now I'm going to kind of drill down into a project that I am most intimately familiar with, which is Chatbots Reset. I am leading this with Arunima, who is my colleague in Mumbai Center of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. What we're trying to do in this is to look at the use of chatbots in healthcare. And we have brought together chatbot developers, platforms, the medical community, civil society, academia, and healthcare regulators to create a framework on how to do this in a responsible way while making sure that people benefit from this technology. So we want to make sure we maximize these beneficial uses, but at the same time minimize negative consequences. There's a project timeline on the right side. I will show it in a little bit more detail in another chart. But first, why are we doing this? If you look at the right side of this chart, a typical patient healthcare journey starts from, let's say, enrolling in an insurance system. And then when they have an illness, they can do symptom checking. They want to know if there is a sickness that needs to be treated right away, or they can wait, or is it serious, and so on. So the healthcare journey starts there and goes through going to the doctor, getting an assessment, getting treatment, and then finally getting discharged, and even doing a post-discharge follow-up. And in general, wellness at the bottom of the chart on, how do we maintain if you have diabetes and other illnesses. Chatbots are finding applications in every step of this kind of a patient healthcare journey. So it's tremendously useful. And why is it useful? You see on the left-hand side of this chart, many, many benefits of the use of chatbots in healthcare. You have 24/7 access. It's low cost to deploy. Can be deployed rapidly. A good example are COVID-19 chatbots. Thousands of chatbots have been deployed around the world to answer questions about COVID-19. You might have used some of them yourself. You can provide consistent answers. You can repurpose them for other uses. We have COVID-19 chatbots. If you have a future pandemic, you can reuse those. Hopefully there is not a future pandemic of this scale. There are better digital tools than websites or apps. When you're using them, they are generating and collecting data for the future training of AI systems. And finally, customers seem to be more satisfied with these kind of systems because they are interactive compared to a web or an app kind of interaction. But then we have to be careful. All these positive benefits, but at the same time, there could be a lot of negative consequences. Legality is the most obvious one. What if the chatbot gives me the wrong answer and I do something and it hurts me? Who is responsible? Is it the developer of the chatbot? Is it the system that is deploying the chatbot? Who is responsible? Privacy. When you're talking to the chatbots, you might actually inadvertently release information. You might say, well, my sister has the same condition, for example, right? That's private information. What do you do with this? How do you protect that private information? Fairness, we have seen in facial recognition. Similarly, a Black man and white man calling with the same symptoms. We have examples where the Black man was asked to stay at home and take rest, and the white man was asked to go to the hospital immediately because you have a heart attack. How do you make sure these things don't happen? How do you make sure the system is transparent? How do you make sure that it is inclusive, addresses people who don't speak the language that the chatbot is in, people in rural societies? How about bias, a big one? So you can see there are a large number of issues that one has to worry about and govern them properly to make sure that this deployment goes correctly. So how did we do this? We got started early last year, and we started with interviewing a number of experts across the sectors and realized that this is actually a problem we need to pay attention to. And at the time, COVID-19 happened. So in March, we brought together a number of leaders, notably people who are working on deploying COVID-19 chatbots, and asked them how they are doing it and how they think it'll go in the future. So it became clear that it's something that we need to be working on more closely. So we brought together 25 global experts in a workshop in May, exploring the uses of chatbots and what kind of issues it'll bring up, like the ones you saw in the previous chart, and what kind of governance mechanisms we can put in place. And the result of that was a close work with this global expert community for the next several months to create a governance framework, which was released in December. You can download it from the World Economic Forum website. If you go to weforum.org and search for Chatbots Governance Framework, you can download it. And I'll say a little bit about what it contains. But the most important thing is it was co-created with the global experts. It was not just me and Arunima sitting in a room and coming up with these things. It's people across the sectors coming together. And what we're doing right now is piloting this framework, working with private industry who are deploying this framework in their day-to-day projects. and giving us feedback on how it is working for them. We are starting to work with governments, and we'll have some exciting updates in the future. So just a couple of weeks ago, we shared the results of the initial piloting in a global summit. So who are the community members? This chart shows the active people who participated in this community. The top row shows large businesses, as you can see, including Apollo Hospitals, Tech Mahindra from India. Second row shows a number of startups from Canada, US, UK, and Germany. Third row shows academia. I mentioned one name, Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, who is a practicing physician and a professor at Duke University. And the last row shows governments and civil societies, such as this organization, ASEI. In this case, it's the Public Health Foundation of India. And also in the bottom right corner, a physician, Dr. Nupur Kohli, who is a practicing physician in the Netherlands, and she's also a World Economic Forum global shaper. And there are some of these that have some stars next to them. Those are the initial piloting partners that we have worked with. Those are two large companies, Tech Mahindra and Apollo Hospitals from India, and Omnibot and Ada, who are startups in Germany. So what does this framework contain? It has primarily two parts. One half is a set of principles. We call them chatbot reset principles. We, together with the community, looked at AI ethics principles and healthcare ethics principles and carefully selected that ones that are useful and necessary for chatbot use in healthcare. But we didn't stop there. The more important part about doing these things, this kind of governance, is to explain how exactly you implement these principles. And that's the bottom half of this schematic here. We have a set of actions, and you'll see this if you download the framework. For each of these 10 principles that we have in the framework, we help developers, providers, and regulators to actionably implement these principles in their day-to-day project implementations as they scale and use chatbots in healthcare during development, deployment, and scaling. So that's about that. And let me wrap up with one other project, which is quite exciting. It actually pertains to a question that I was asked in the chat. One of the segments of the population that's most vulnerable is the youth. And AI is appearing in toys, like Piyush had a chart with the AI toys in them. How do we make sure that the AI acts responsibly when interacting with youth? Is it going to be responsible what the child said and later on share with the marketing companies and so on, and they target the child? We don't want things like that. So to highlight responsible uses, a colleague of mine is leading a project called Generation AI, and I have highlighted the important part in red here. Next month, we are holding a Smart Toy Awards, which is open to everyone. It's going to be a virtual ceremony hosted by will.i.am, a famous rap singer, and other judges. And you can go to smarttoyawards.org to see what is happening there. And with that, I'll wrap up, and I'll mention the opportunity, just like Vilas did. This organization, as a civil society organization, can explore these kind of efforts that I talked about, joining these efforts as a civil society, representing the interests of this group of people in this team here in this presentation on citizen scientists, what you want to do, working with the forum to provide the perspectives and guidance, and we welcome that. With that, I pass the mic back on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sundar. That was an incredible presentation and a lot of ideas there. There are a bunch of questions that have been coming. If I can direct one question to you is, in what ways can you design a health chatbot that is secure and promises privacy of information as well? This is coming from...
That's a great question. And again, I encourage you to look at the framework because we have really detailed look at this. Some of the 10 principles, a couple of them, one is efficacy. How do you make sure that the chatbot is efficacious? It does what it's supposed to do. And how does it do the protection of privacy? If you look at the framework, we talk about how a developer can take actions, for example, to make sure that they are following efficacy principles and as well as privacy principles. We talk about how you should follow several national guidelines. In fact, the EU just released a major AI Act on April 21st, and they talk about different risk levels. And in fact, chatbots fall in the intermediate risk level. And they talk about how, for example, a chatbot should declare to the listener or viewer that it is in fact a chatbot. It may sound simple and silly, but people may not know. They think they're talking to a real person, and they may say things that are private. So there are many such activities you can do.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. There are a bunch of questions more in the Q&A panel. So one from Venkat says, has GDPR evolved out of WEF, and are we going to have data privacy laws across the globe? I have a perspective on that as well, but I'll let you answer it, Sundar.
Yeah, the factual answer, no. The answer is no. GDPR did not evolve out of the WEF, though we would like to think that we have influenced a lot of the thought processes behind it. It was an EU assembly generated ruling. It has definitely stood out as the example of how to do these things right, and they have followed up with this Artificial Intelligence Act now. So these are great things to follow and replicate elsewhere.
And privacy is topmost of attention these days. Hackers, of course, are out there, and the challenge is we as individuals sometimes don't do proper privacy checkups and regularly and don't pay attention. But systemically, if organizations can make their systems more foolproof and more secure, that helps. And just to inform the audience here, we have a privacy-related blog penned by Santosh Shankola, another of our board members, which is going live tonight. So very timely and topical topic. One more question is, how are the projects at World Economic Forums initiated? And but wondering why it started only in Jan 2020? That's a question from Venkat.
Sure. The center itself was founded in 2017, and many projects have been going on since then. And most typical way a project gets started is one of the stakeholders comes for help. I'll give you an example. The country of Rwanda wanted to use drones to distribute medicine and blood to remote areas because they don't have a good road infrastructure. But they couldn't do it because the regional aviation authority said you can't fly drones. And so they came to the World Economic Forum, and we worked with them to create the regulatory framework that allows them to do. And Rwanda is successfully using it to reach remote areas right now. This particular project started in January 20 because that's when I joined that group and expressed interest in starting this.
Got it. Wonderful. Well, we are out of time, of course, and this is an incredible session. We are seeing a lot of participation, so please continue to post your questions, continue to tweet as well with the hashtag AI Summit, ASEI AI Summit, and we will, of course, announce prizes towards the end of the session. So with that, thank you, Sundar, and let me introduce the next speaker for the day, Lak Lakshmanan. And Lak is a friend from my professional life. He works at Google, and more than somebody who just works at Google, he is a multidimensional personality. Not only does his he's the director of data analytics and AI solutions on Google Cloud, where his team builds software for business problems using clouds, Google Cloud's data analysis and machine learning products. He is a scientist who used to work at Climate Corporation, and where he was leading data scientists to build probabilistic estimates of the past, current, and future weather. So every Earth Day, I think about companies like Climate Corporation, and I think about Lak. So, and before that, he was a senior research scientist in Oklahoma National Severe Storms Lab. And of course, he's written 4 books. Google Scholar page cites his citations, how many times they've been referenced by other scientists. And we're so thrilled that he's here. And of course, I'll mention that there are books up for grab, courtesy of LAC, and we will announce the winners toward the end. But with that, let me welcome LAC onto the stage, and thank you for your partnership. And LAC, thank you for agreeing to be here. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Piyush. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me go ahead and share my tab. Let's see. There we go. Perfect. So I'm going to be talking today about what Google does in terms of AI for social good. As a leader in the field of AI, we take our responsibility for applying AI in a beneficial way very seriously. And I'll basically talk about a few things. I'll talk about some of the innovative AI research that we are doing at Google that basically plays into social good. And also one of the neat things about Google is the way that we have the ability to reach the public. So we'll talk about some of the ways in which we use AI to serve the public. But Google as just one company. And the other thing of being a leader in the AI space is about empowering other people to solve hard problems. So I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing in terms of empowering others to solve hard problems, and in terms of building tools to do AI in a responsible way. So it's been great watching the previous speakers because they've kind of set this up where they talked about the importance of making sure that we use AI responsibly, that we think about the beneficial uses of AI, and about frameworks and like governmental frameworks, etc., for the use of AI. But Google is a very practical company, right? And so we're basically looking at this from a very practical lens of what can we do that is real, that we can actually implement and use those as examples and inspiration to basically empower other folks to do things. So I'll start off by talking about some of the innovative research at Google around AI. To set this up, this was a flood in Orissa, and you can imagine that floods like these cause tremendous amounts of damage. And it's not just about damage; like you can predict floods, but when you say that you're predicting a flood, you need to basically evacuate the people who live in the path of a flood. So what you see on the left is what the flood forecast in India used to look like using public sources. And what you see on the right-hand side is the flood forecast for the same event using Google models and Google inundation models and much higher resolution data sets as far as the built-in coverage is concerned. And what you see here, these dark areas, those are all where people live. And as you can imagine, if you can evacuate fewer number of people, there's a much greater chance that those people, you can actually evacuate them, right? People are not basically stuck trying to get out of a particular region. Okay. The other thing, and I'll basically talk about how we surface this research to the general public. But in another area that we've been involved in is with eye disease. Diabetic retinopathy is the fastest growing cause when it comes to blindness. And now, again, looking at India again, India and Southeast Asia, nearly 140 million people are expected to get diabetes-related blindness by 2040. So this is a very significant problem. And the way to resolve this problem is to have regular screening, right? You need to basically ensure that people get eye screening every year. But in order to carry out this eye screening, we do not have enough ophthalmologists. So how do you basically scale up screening where you need to screen 1.4 billion people in India, right? But to be able to do this in a very routine way, you need to screen them every year. So the way that you do this is, of course, like not to use AI. And what you're seeing here is a diabetic retinopathy detection model that does as well as humans do in terms of catching early signs of disease. So you basically see it's an image classification model, and it's basically able to identify diseased eyes and rank them. And the idea is that once you start to see moderate to severe DR, you can basically recommend that these people go see ophthalmologists. So this allows us to basically provide screening to the population at large, something that would be difficult if it had to be done completely through humans. So one of the things I think that people talk about is AI is going to take away people's jobs. I think as much more of an optimist, what AI lets you do is it allows you to complement humans, right? And to basically make it possible for the kinds of things that humans can do, but extend it so that you can do it much more often, right? AI is about scale, right? It's not about replacing people, but it's about scaling out the ability. So where today only a few people can get their eyes screened, we can now ensure that the entire population gets its eyes screened because it can be done through AI, and you still have the human experts coming in to actually provide the care and service, etc., for eye disease. Another example of AI for social good in terms of research is that we worked with NOAA. And by the way, all of these projects that I'm talking about were in collaboration with experts in the field. So when I talk about the flood forecasting model, we are working with the Indian Meteorological Department. When we talk about the eye disease, we're working with Arvind Eye Hospital. And here, when we're talking about basically finding humpback whales, okay, humpback whales travel the entire ocean, but you need to basically know where they are and identify specific individuals. And it turns out that the sounds that they make, you can actually record those sounds, and using those sounds, you can basically identify where those individuals are. So this is you can use neural networks to identify whale calls. And we work with NOAA in order to do that, and ran that classifier to on 21 years of underwater recordings. And basically, for example, on this map, you're basically seeing where in the past we kind of identified the presence of humpback whales. So why is that useful? Why is it important to kind of know where the humpback whales are? Well, you can basically apply it, right? Everything about AI is not just about basically training on a data set. It's also about how you take those things and use them operationally in predictions. As an example here, so I live in Seattle, and we have the Puget Sound where there's a tremendous amount of shipping, but we also have orca whales, right? That basically share the same waters. And what this is basically doing is that it's now working with the Department of Fisheries in Canada to listen to the sounds of whales to basically know where the whales are, and that allows the departments to basically set the fishing routes to basically give whales a berth. And if the whales basically start having distressed sounds, to be able to basically recognize them and stop shipping for a period of time, etc., in that area. So this allows us to use the presence of whales to basically share these very narrow shipping lanes in a much more effective way. So as I talked about, right, so you can do AI for the purposes of training ML models, but ultimately it comes down to basically doing the predictions. So when I talked about the flood forecasting, yes, so we can do the flood forecasting, but how do you actually surface it to the folks who need to do the surfacing? Well, that's where it's important to basically, this reach of Google comes along. So if you've ever done a search, for example, someone is searching for the Nagla flood, and we're basically providing this information box that's basically talking about the major flooding in the Nagla area, where they are, where it is going to likely to be, should they evacuate, etc. So basically getting a flood alert and also showing it in Google Maps so that you know, right, if you're going to be traveling, you know if you're going to be traveling through a flooded area, providing smartphone notifications on Android. So again, it's not about just the research, it's about taking that research that we're doing to basically do flood forecasting in a much more accurate and better way, and using it to serve the public and to do this in a very scalable way. So public alerts from Google have now already been sent to over 2 billion people in over hundreds of thousands of events. And in India specifically, right, we have the operational system that now covers more than 200 million people. So that's basically those river basins that we have now mapped much more accurately, and we are basically able to run an inundation model for flood forecasting. Again, this is in conjunction with the Indian Meteorological Department. Other ways that we've been using AI is COVID, of course. We're now living through the pandemic, and we've been using AI considerably for informing the public, for basically figuring out which voices are authoritative, which and etc., so that when people do a search, you don't basically end up with misinformation, to combat misinformation. We also are using it to provide support, helping people adapt to a changing world. We added a whole bunch of new capabilities to Google Meet, for example, to support educational uses of Google Meet. And then also contributing to recovery efforts. And this is something, again, that we worked very closely with Piyush Ji's organization, Spring ML. A lot of US states, basically their labor, Department of Labor, with the unemployment applications, those were all under severe demand, and basically helping them, basically modernize it in a very fast way, building chatbots to basically allow people to apply for unemployment benefits. Basically, now recently, figuring out ways to basically where's the closest place that you can go get a vaccine, etc. So if you've ever interacted with a lot of these websites and state websites to identify vaccines, etc., many of them were actually built using Google technologies to essentially help contribute to these recovery efforts. So as an example of surfacing authoritative information on search, if you search for COVID, you basically get all these COVID updates, you get worldwide cases, you get the maps. All of these are automatically surfaced, and this is all done through AI, right? So basically, this is a combination of natural language processing. It's a combination of basically figuring out which articles come from authoritative sources, which articles come from sources that may not be, scientific. Searching for things like corona symptoms. Somebody searches saying that I'm losing my sense of taste, then basically recognizing that that is a coronavirus symptom and basically providing them advice to go seek medical help. Those are all incredibly effective uses of AI to help deal with the pandemic. Another thing, again, like helping remote classrooms. So in about 119 countries, a lot of work with things like automatic captioning. Basically a lot of and working in low bandwidth environments. We have a lot of students in especially poorer communities who don't have the quality of internet working. So there's quite a bit of work that went into the AI models of Google Meet to help deal with those low bandwidth situations and automatic captioning and so on, to basically help with the educational aspects of it. Again, I just talked about this. We have public data sets on COVID-19 about basically mobility, right? So we now know how much people move in like retail areas, in parks, etc. And basically published a data set that's called the Google Mobility data set that's being used by a lot of governments to basically figure out like the faces, like what kind of things do they have to do to basically keep the public safe. And I talked about the unemployment bureaus and basically providing quicker service especially with this dramatic demand that happened with a lot of the like the government provided help and being able to basically reach that to the general population, and contributing the public health response in terms of even like the protein folding, which was an incredible amount like AI effort out of DeepMind, which again, protein folding is super important because you need to be able to figure out all of these variants. Like one of the things that we're hearing about in India now is that like several new variants have come about because of the population having basically the virus having mutated. And all of these things have to be sequenced and sequenced fast. And protein folding is a very important part of this process. And it turns out that we can now use AI models to predict how a protein is basically going to fold. And those are all things that are going to be very important to be able to keep out in front of this virus. So that's what Google, right? We have been doing in terms of research, in terms of basically taking our research and providing to the public. But again, we're just one company. How do we empower others to also use AI to solve hard problems? As an example of that, this is in India, and now we're trying to basically reduce neonatal problems with just newly born babies and morbidity in underprivileged communities. And it turns out that, right, you basically have about 2.2 million mothers who are expecting in India, but 9 states. The problem is that roughly 30% of women drop off. And what we have is an AI model that Arman is now using, that Google helped them build it, that basically predicts which women are likely to drop off. And having predicted that, basically using that to design targeted interventions to basically ensure that these women don't drop off and that they get neonatal help for their for their babies. Okay, so this is again the AI model that's very similar to like a churn prediction model that you might use commercially, but being used for for social good. And again, much of these things are in collaboration with others. So this is Makerere University in Uganda, and essentially air quality is a huge problem. And one of the things is that you basically have a whole bunch of unscheduled or group taxis, right? So basically about installing these low-cost air sensors to forecast air quality over Uganda, right? So that's one of the things that we're doing. Another thing is that we've set up a fund called the Lacuna Fund that allows us to basically create labeled data sets for doing better agriculture, better translation. So we've been working with a lot of Indian regional languages and translation of Indian regional languages. As you know, every state in India has a major language, and those languages tend to be well represented. But you also have a whole bunch of languages, like say Konkani, for example, that is spoken in parts of Karnataka that aren't like, Kannada is the main language in Karnataka, but you basically also have Konkani. And the idea is like, how do you basically build translation models for these not so prevalent languages and so on, so that these are all things that are very important, and to be able to create these labeled data sets to keep languages alive is an important effort as well. Okay. The other thing that we're very, very conscious about is that AI by itself, the way a lot of people use it, is that it basically becomes like a black box. But it doesn't have to be a black box. You want to basically understand why the model is doing what it's doing, so that you can build trust and accountability into it. And now Piyush ji talked about how you have models that, like the face detection, work much better on lighter skinned people than on darker skinned people. It turns out to be something that's endemic to a lot of the way that film and camera technology has been developed over time. In fact, there's like Kodak, for example, started to develop color film that would capture brown and black tones much better only after furniture manufacturers started to complain that their furniture was not looking good. Like their beautiful mahogany wood wasn't looking good in photographs. And that's basically what prompted like a lot of the improvements in terms of film color. But those kinds of problems exist throughout in a lot of the lighting, camera technology, and so on. So those are ways in which you can basically use AI to somehow correct for these fairness biases. So one of the ways that you do this is through what's called explainable AI. So I talked about the retinal eye disease, and no doctor is going to basically believe that this is actually a diseased eye versus a non-diseased eye if you don't explain to them which part of the eye that this model was looking at when it made the decision. Okay. Another thing, whenever you create an AI model, you want to basically figure out how it's working on different segments of the population. That's called sliced evaluation. And basically, we're building tools to make sliced evaluation much easier in a variety of different tools that AI developers use. And also basically having these things called model cards that allow people to basically specifically talk about the limitations and trade-offs that their models are doing. For example, here's a face detection model, and it's basically talking about how it works on different segments of the population, right? And so on. So all of this is basically very important because explainability is something that you fit throughout your ML lifecycle. And as I work in Google Cloud, we build tools to help folks develop ML models. So we find that by us building these tools to make it possible to identify dataset imbalances and making sure the model works properly on data and explaining predictions as you surface them to end users, you basically now we find ourselves that as our tools get used by an HSBC, by a Sanofi, by a FedEx, we basically start to see that explainability basically, that impact going across as so that's another of the great things about building these tools that everyone uses. And with that, I will stop. Thank you all very much. 3 links, AI.Google Social Good, AI.Google Research Pubs, and cloud.google.com/solutions/AI. Those have more information about all of these projects I talked about, and shameless plugs for the 2 books. I think one of these books is what we're going to be handing out today. So one of the books are on data science in the Google Cloud Platform. The other is a newer book, Machine Learning Design Patterns. Follow me on Twitter, LAK_GCP. Thank you all very much.
Wonderful presentation, Lak. Thank you so much. And you don't have to apologize for promoting because this is what brings the community together. I failed to mention in the beginning that I learned about you first by watching the Coursera courses on GCP. And when I got a chance to meet you at the Google Next convention, I had to stand in queue to get photographed with you. Can you imagine now you're coming here and talking at our convention? So really, really appreciate you doing this. There are a couple of questions that have popped up for you, Lak. So, so one question does say that, while all of these AI efforts you mentioned are philanthropic, can you comment on the budgeting of philanthropic efforts versus revenue generation efforts with AI?
Right. I mean, yeah. So can I talk about the budgeting? I cannot really talk about the budget, but you're absolutely right. Right. This is AI for good is not the majority of the AI efforts that we do. The majority of AI efforts that we do are tied towards things like Gmail and YouTube and Google Search and our main products. However, I think this lens of basically how can we use AI for good pervades it. And we're not, as you can see, when we talk about flood forecasting, we're not just saying we're doing the research for flood forecasting. We're also thinking about how do we surface the flood forecast through Google Search and Google Maps and YouTube and etc. How do we combat misinformation? So that's, I think, one of the ways in which we are pretty unique is that we don't basically say, here's the good stuff that we do and here's our regular stuff. We look at how we can take the good stuff that we do and incorporate it into the revenue producing the main corpus of everything that we do.
No, that's great. And I think this answers Muthu's question as well as Peter's question on how does it generate revenue for Google. So I think you've answered all. One question, it was appearing in my mind also, that is it now that Sundar is the CEO of Alphabet and Google, that you are doing more with India, or was it there all along earlier as well?
Great question. Are we doing more with India because of Sundar? I think Sundar has something to do with it, but it is not India as such. One of the big initiatives that Sundar, I think, has started is this thing called the Next Billion Users Initiative. So Sundar has basically talked about, like, we have the haves in the developed world. How do we basically build technology for the next billion users? And that is headed out of Singapore, and basically and India is a huge part of it, but as is Africa, right? And so we think of that as the next billion users, and we're actually starting to see technologies that are developed for the next billion users starting to make their way into the core Google products, right? Basically because much of, say, India is mobile first. They don't know. I think we all know folks that who don't own computers. Their only computer is a phone. And that means that we've had to basically, when we think of Google Forms, and when we develop Google Forms, the Next Billion Users initiative basically forces us to think, how does Google Forms work if they have to fill out this form completely on a mobile phone? And it basically helps us do the design in a better way. But I think it's a better way, basically, because then it basically makes it such that even you and me, who do own desktop computers, we find our phones much more useful. And that's because there's a lot of design that's happened from the Singapore team that's focused on the next billion users.
Wonderful. And again, we were talking about Sundar Pichai, and of course we have Sundar from WEF on our session here today as well, and he's answering questions via chat. So great to see the speakers stick around. And so we could go on, and there are definitely a lot more questions. So one more question which has come in, I believe you could answer. And if you, by any chance, feel you don't want to answer, let me know. Face detection has become quite popular, but what security measures should be taken? And he says, I feel that the people may not like if their picture is taken. So there's a lot of security issues when it comes to at-large face detection impact.
Absolutely. So one thing is that we want to be very clear about terminology here. There is face detection and there is face recognition. And there is a third use case, which is on crowd size estimation, right? So there are three different use cases, and the way you treat crowd size estimation, face detection, and face recognition, they're three different problems. And they come up with three different ways in which you address them. Crowd size estimation is the least privacy sensitive thing out there. It's not that it is like, it has no implications at all. If you live in an authoritarian society, knowing where a lot of people are can be problematic. But other than that, I don't think most people have a problem with saying that there are 3,000 people in the center of Bellevue today, right? Or whatever, right? So that tends to not be that much of a problem, but it can be a problem in authoritarian contexts. The second thing is face detection. Face detection is basically saying there is a person in this image, but I don't know who that person is. I don't care who that person is. Face detection is often what you need to do for things like you're in Google Meet and you need to know, well, where is a person in the image so I can focus the camera on them, right? Or where I can basically blur out the background and not blur the patient's face. So that is face detection. Again, the privacy concerns are higher than crowd size estimation, but not too high because there's no personal information in there other than there is a person in the frame and now we're doing something. So face detection is a pretty common thing, and you can basically get that out of the Google Vision API gives you face detection. The third problem is the third use case, right? Our AI problem that you solve is face recognition. Face recognition is the one with significant privacy concerns, and Google doesn't do it, right? So our Vision API, Google Cloud Vision API, has never supported face recognition. And recently, I think in the last year, Amazon's image recognition API also stopped supporting face recognition as they kind of recognize, pun unintended, that this could be problematic. So the industry is now coming around to this realization that face recognition is not something that we want to support, that it is problematic. But I mean, we want to be very clear about terminology here.
Right. No, thanks for clarifying that. But I thought Amazon was stopping the face recognition only for 1 year, and Google and others and IBM as well said we will not.
Okay, yeah. So I know that Amazon had an announcement about stopping it. I'm not sure about whether it's a 1 year or not part. I know that we had discussions 5 years ago, and we decided that Google Cloud would never do face recognition, and we were very happy that became I'm hoping that it becomes the industry standard and nobody does it.
So here's something which I'll challenge you, because I use Google Photos, and Google Photos does recognize. So doesn't it recognize?
What is the difference between what Google Photos does? Yeah, so the big difference is what Google Photos does is that it says, here is the same face in the rest of your photographs, right? It just does a similarity matching. And it tells you if you want to go assign a name here, and you can put in a name, and you can put whatever you want as the name, right? You can say XYZ is the name, and then it'll say, these are all of the photographs of XYZ. Well, the fact that you gave that a name is just between you, right? And no human ever looks at that. So this is just about saying that these things are your photographs and these are the similar ones. We don't actually support something where you have a camera mounted in front of your house or on a street, and we can tell you who's basically walking by, right? We're not. That's not a supported use case at all. So that is a big difference.
Thank you, Lak. And there are other questions as well in chat, so we will address them via chat for you. In the interest of time, I would like to say thank you, Lak, for being here. And let's move on to our next speaker. To introduce the next speaker, I want to introduce our next moderator, Muthu. Please come on, Muthu. Muthu is the president of our Michigan chapter, and he is going to be conducting the next 2 sessions. Over to you, Muthu.
Yeah. Thank you.
The presentation back.
Yeah, Dr. Lak, can you stop your presentation? Thank you. Thank you, Piyush. Thank you to all the excellent speakers so far. Dr. Lak, just like how Piyush said, I'm also a silent follower of yours and I've watched some of your videos, quite fascinating. So over on to the next section, continuing with the authors today at the ASCI's AI Summit. On behalf of the Michigan chapter as well as the national team, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Raj Ramesh. A good friend of ours, Dr. Raj Ramesh, has a doctorate in AI. He has broad experience with digital transformation. He helps organizations bring together complementary strengths of machines and humans to effect grand change. And we know of Dr. Ramesh, friend circle, he wears many hats: engineer, designer, business owner, mentor. Some interesting things I like of him: excellent storyteller, doodler, video creator, and so on and so forth. But in his recent book, AI and You, How to Think, Thrive, and Transform in an Artificial Intelligence Future, Dr. Raj explores how individuals and companies can best prepare for the new changes AI will bring. Raj is passionate about simplifying the complexity of AI and ML, so many more, like a layman like me can understand the topic and adapt our professional careers. One way he does this is through easy to comprehend whiteboard videos. He has produced over 150 of them. Audience, it's all available on YouTube for free. And no wonder it has gained him over than 40,000 subscribers. So he's also a TEDx speaker. And one of his recent TEDx talks was titled AI Cannot Doodle. So without further ado, let me request Dr. Raj to come and talk to us. Dr. Raj, over to you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Muthu. And thank you, ASCI, for organizing this event. So far, it's been fantastic. Love listening to all the speakers here. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So hoping you can see that. If not, just give a shout out, unmute and give a shout out. Yep. Okay, AI and you. I want to introduce to you one of the smartest devices on the planet. This is a smart diaper. Actually, Dr. Lakshmanan might know, this is from Google or a subsidiary of Google. What it does is it can detect yellow stuff, and it can detect brown stuff, and on a baby, and then it can alert a parent on their mobile phone that something is happening. Well, it'll give us sound, of course. And for people like me, good thing it didn't exist when I brought up my kids, because I would have probably ignored the yellow stuff for a while and said, oh, it's just yellow, 1 signal, 2 signals, like the whistles on this pressure cooker, right? You ignore it a couple of times, and then it'll probably give a huge loud beep, which will upset everybody around me. And if I happen to be in a Zoom meeting in the middle of work, then everybody in the meeting will know that I'm a lousy parent. Apart from that lousy user experience one has to design, or a good user experience one has to design, let's just talk about the technical aspects of this smart diaper. This diaper can detect temperature changes or the temperature of the content that's in the diaper, the sodium content, the viscosity, and all that. And in addition to alerting the user, the dad or the parent, it can send this information to Google Cloud, probably GCP, and then we can run machine learning models on it to make predictions on this stuff. And the machine learning model could actually make a prediction that maybe an infection is going to hit the kid or hit the baby in 48 hours or something like that, which means that data can be now transmitted directly to the doctor. And the doctor calls the parent and says, hey, you might want to bring your kid in because I see an infection ready to come along and maybe we should prevent it. So if you look at the technology that's required to run this smart diaper, it includes, first of all, sensing devices. And then you have data that has to be transmitted to the mobile phone. Obviously, it has machine learning models on the cloud. It uses mobile devices. It uses networking because you have data transfer across. It uses the cloud, of course. It has cybersecurity built in because you don't want your kids' data to be mixed up with somebody else's data. And so you don't want to be called into a hospital when your kid is not sick. And the health system, I probably missed a few more, right? All of this technology, the super convergence of technology is coming together to make this possible. And the point I want to make is that AI is one portion of this, but there is a huge set of disciplines that go around that make this diaper possible, just technology-wise. And then on top of that, to be able to offer it to a customer, you got to have the user experience set right. You got to have the marketing, the selling, the user experience design, the project management, build to go through the ML ops process, and a whole lot more. So my point is, you don't necessarily have to be a machine learning engineer or a data scientist to be able to offer value in this new AI world. There's a lot to it. And that's what I'm going to talk about. On the other hand, some of you or some may take the attitude that it makes no sense to worry about the future because by the time you get there, it's already the past. We've been talking about, most of us are optimistic about the future, but I wanted to get a feel for what you think the future is going to be. So let me offer up this interactive poll, if you will, and see if we can get a feel for what the audience thinks.
Dr. Raj, the code went away.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm still sharing, but let me move this. I have a different window that I got to move in here.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So if you could just go to your device and go to menti.com and give us a sense of where you are on this AI spectrum. Are you really worried about AI? That's on the left-hand side. Or are you really upbeat about it and anywhere in between? Go to menti.com, use this code, and you can type in your answer. I'll just wait for a few minutes to see where people are. Again, only 3. I think we have a lot more participants here. Well, that's interesting so far. Either we're too optimistic or too pessimistic. Maybe the optimism now is increasing based on the previous speakers, which is good. Highly optimistic crowd.
And it gets better over time.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Okay. This is very interesting. And I am glad that we engineers feel this way, because what usually is engineers are, I think, a little more cautiously optimistic. So if you want to, if we engineers build a bridge and we decide that we come up with a strength and we say this is X, somehow we also generate a random number between 1 and 10 and multiply that X by that random number so that we are more assured that this bridge can withhold the traffic that it's meant for, kind of being over engineer most of things. So I'm glad that we're not in the neutral, rather we're leaning towards the upbeat. Good. So each one of you also gets a sense of what the audience feels like. Let me switch back to the presentation. Okay. We talked about machine learning. I'll give you a simple example of machine learning. And, retinopathy was mentioned in the previous example as well by Dr. Lakshmanan. We have tumor classification as one other problem that machine learning deals with, which is classifying it into 2 classes, benign or malignant. And this is called a binary classification because there are 2 classes. And the picture on the right is called the confusion matrix. And what this tells you is how confused is the machine in classifying stuff. So if there was a real tumor and the machine classified it as a tumor, then it's green, it's good. If there wasn't a tumor and the machine said it's not a tumor, it's great. So these green portions are good. But here is where we have the problem. So if there was a tumor and the machine said there was not a tumor is not detected, then we have a problem because we missed the diagnosis, and maybe future down the line, there could be problems. And likewise, if there was no tumor, but the machine said there was a tumor, then we end up giving unnecessary treatment to the patient. So a simple classifier problem, and this is how we look at things. But these can have life-changing effects. Another example is if you were to, and I don't know if this is true, but if you were to go to, if you're a lucky single, or I mean a single, and you go to Shaadi.com and you put in your information to get a partner, you might end up with a partner. But how do you know if that, and if that Shaadi.com uses AI or machine learning to classify this match and figure out, if this be a good match or not? How do you know that this falls within the green region, right? You might, hopefully it falls within the green region and whatever it suggested is good for you, and you didn't end up with, wrong partner like in the red ones, because that could be a life-changing event for you as well. So binary classification, simple classifier, but could have implications. What I want to get to is what has happened that we, what is changing in this world that we're moving towards a data-centric paradigm. We used to have this logical paradigm. Most of us have written program that has a lot of if-then statements. And now we're moving towards a data-centric paradigm because, as Piyush mentioned, a lot of things have changed. We get more data, we get a lot of computing power. So perhaps this makes sense. And if you look at face recognition, which we have talked about, or face identification as another problem, when you look at your partner's face, what runs through your mind and how do you recognize your partner? You don't really look at their face or your friend's face and go look at the size of the nose, the color of the hair, the distance between the lips and the eyebrows, or anything of that sort, to be able to run through a logical set of sequences to say, oh yeah, that's my partner. In fact, you do it instantaneously, right? And so we are trying to figure out in machine learning and AI, we're trying to figure out how, so perhaps it's not running through a logic. So we can, what is that mechanism that recognizes faces? And then that's how we started exploring face recognition through data, because we have lots of it. And we're building models to be able to do it. This is great. And this is what machines do. And it's important to understand that we're moving from a logic to a data paradigm. And I'll come to this probably later as we talk through what is it that you have to do to adjust to this new paradigm. I want to give you another example of machine learning and now downplay its power a little bit. So if I go to the top of a building, I'm probably not going to jump off, because I know if I jump off that building, I'll either go to the morgue or go to the ER. This I knew intuitively. I didn't even have to jump once to know that. And I didn't have to Google this either, because I knew this fact before Google came into existence, or before I was able to search anything up in Google. Even a baby would not crawl off the edge of that building, because it knows intuitively that it's going to hurt itself. Whereas if I were to train an AI system, I may not be able to train that AI system without actually pushing it off of the edge of the building, making it fall, figuring out, and then it has to learn its model, and then I have to push it off 1,000 times to be able to have the machine learn that falling off the building is dangerous. Of course, you don't have to actually push it off. You can use simulation, but close enough, right? So humans still have a cognitive ability that's higher than most machine learning in large sets of domains. In narrow domains, yes, machines may be smarter, but in a general cognitive sense, humans are still smarter. Well, except for maybe teenagers. I may have spoken a little bit too soon. I got 3 teenagers and a dog. And the dog is also a teenager now. He's like 1 year old, and I believe that's teenage age for a dog. And I can tell you one thing for sure: it's easier to train a dog. So, but in all seriousness, we humans have better cognitive abilities. So, what are those cognitive abilities that we have that we can use to our advantage, that we can use to complement AI and or machine learning and make the world a better place, like some of the topics I've touched upon? One thing that we want to do is Google or any search engine. I keep mentioning Google because that's been referenced a lot in this talk. Anything gives a lot of information. We have a lot of information at our fingertips, but what we don't necessarily have is understanding that and making sense of it. That's where I think we as humans have an advantage, and we'll have to figure out how to use that to get a better understanding of the environment around us. And this is one of the key concepts that I will use in talking about how do we understand our world. I came across this paper from Harvard Business Review recently, and it says, are you spending your parenting time and energy wisely? They basically created two-dimensional matrix, two by two matrix. This is the framework that we management consultants do, or management consultants create. And in this framework, passion is on one side, contribution on another. Passion means what is the level of passion that you have to do a certain activity, and what is the contribution that it will to the kid's growth, to your child's growth. So they had said, of course, in any framework, 2x2 framework, we always want to be on the top right. And there are a couple of things that amaze me with this simple framework. It's a 2x2 simple framework. On one hand, in machine learning, if you think about machine learning, we are operating in multidimensional space, or thousands of dimensions. You feed an image is has thousands of dimensions, and then we're working in multidimensional space, data in multidimensional space. And here there are management consultants working in two-dimensional space. And this is the extent of where we are in the progress of understanding complexity, as an example. So what I did was, basically they said, here, this activity, if you have the passion and there's a good contribution to the kid, well, you might want to do it. And you might want to reduce some activities, eliminate and delegate. So I was thinking through and try to put some examples here. My wife happened to be at work for one whole week, and then I had to feed the kids. And I said, well, I don't really have a passion to feed the kids, but I have to have them fed. So it basically contributes towards their growth. So I should delegate this activity. So I took them to McDonald's and had them eat meals at McDonald's for the whole week. Of course, she was not happy when she came back, and she said, what'd you do? You took them to McDonald's? Well, showing this 2x2 matrix really didn't help my situation at all, even though it was a management framework, right? So this is the extent of what we do. I'll show you another one that I came across recently as well. McKinsey didn't want to be beaten by HBR, so they came up with this other framework that said 3x3x3. Maybe improving on a little more. So they said, if you want to learn intentional learning, and you can look these up, intentional learning, you have to set 3 goals, try to get it done in 3 months, and inform 3 people so that they can either support you or it gives visibility, and so you'll actually get it done. The visualization that I created for this is mine. So they didn't even bother to do that. So this is the extent of how we use frameworks to understand the world around us. What I want to do is I want to take you a little bit deeper and show you maybe a different way to understand the world around us so that we can help solve the problems that we have to. The problem is often we create mental models. Different people create different mental models, and school hasn't taught us any particular way that we need to create our mental models. And therefore, your mental model may be different from my mental model. And if the mental models are different, we get into arguments because we don't agree on a lot of things, because you think something, I think something. The other day, my boss and I didn't agree on certain things, and obviously his mental model was wrong. But the fact is, we had an argument. That argument could have cost me my promotion or a promotion. I don't know it, but damn it, I'm an engineer. I better have my model. My model is right? That's the attitude we take. So let's move to there was a mention of digital transformation as well earlier. Companies are spending gobs of money trying to transform themselves into a better future. And as an example, I'll just say that we're in the internet era, and we're trying to bring AI into the corporation, and AI is going to be fundamental to transformation. It's going to be changing a lot of things. And if companies can do this, and companies are trying to do this, my question is, why don't we as people try to take those same principles that they use to transform themselves and apply it to ourselves and transform ourselves? So here is my version of people transformation. So that's maybe a you or a me in the current state, and then this is a you or a me in the future state. Now, don't worry about the pictures and the doodles that I drew here. This is for my own sake, and you can draw your own as well. But the concept is similar. You have a certain environment in your current state, and you'll have a certain environment in your future state, and you can try to guess what your future state is going to be like. And maybe based on that future, maybe you'll make a transition to that future. So let's say you are interested in learning machine learning, and because you think that'll be you want to program in machine learning, and you think it'll be great to position yourself at a competitive advantage within your company. So sure, now that you recognize that and you think that's the case, I'm not saying everybody should go out and learn machine learning, and I'll come to that topic as well later. But now you've made that recognition, you can make that leap to figure out what your future should be, or what do you want your future to be. And I think the way to kind of visualize this, just like the 2x2 matrix, we can get a little better than that 2x2 matrix, is to actually create pictures. And all you need to do is have these 4 things in context. One is use squares to represent something concrete. Maybe use an oval to represent something as a concept, like a idea or a culture. People are special objects, so we'll create a people-like figure, and then you have relationships among them, right? That's all you need. With these basic elements, you may be able to simply represent visually what the environment is and where do you want to go. Here are some examples that I use. I just doodled this up, and your drawing will be completely different from mine, but this is a person jumping off of a building. Here, I wanted to draw a picture of, all cars are going in one way. This is another lane. This is a different lane, but there's one car going in the opposite lane. So maybe that guy is drunk, or that person is drunk. Here, don't cross a railway track when a train is barreling towards you. Never fight with your wife, because you'll always lose that argument. And I learned this after a couple of knocks with a frying pan. So the point I'm trying to make is, you can doodle this, whatever you want, you can doodle, and nobody's really going to look at that, but it gets you a clearer understanding of your current environment. So I wanted to take another poll to see, before we get into your role and how do you adjust, I wanted to get a sense for what kinds of roles people have. What kind of roles or does this audience have? Let me try to share this other poll, if it works. Yep. Please type in a word. Go to this same website. Please type in a word or a phrase that represents what you do. Solution architect. Yep, we talked about architecture as well being important in the future. As a person, I guess, who connects many things. Nice. Consultant, software engineer, a lot of software engineers. So maybe software engineers are looking to move into the next phase, like machine learning engineer, data analyst, CEO. I don't know. That's good. Math educator. I often don't know what I do as well. Business analyst. Nice. Entrepreneur. Very good. Student, industry leader. So as we look at this, it might be useful to just think, how would AI affect your role? What would you do to incorporate AI in your role? And that's, as you give it some thought, we'll come back to it hopefully a little bit soon. But I'm not going to obviously go into each of these roles and say how AI can help you, but I want to give you kind of a general framework that will help you think through what you can do. So I drew up some roles. Here are some common roles that not necessarily, obviously, there's so many thousands of roles probably, but doctor, leader, there was a servant leader in there, engineer, sales, marketing, PM, chemist, UX leaders, UX expert, and so on. So you have all these roles, one of them being a data scientist, of course. Question is, where do you fit in? How does your context change? What can you do to adapt to this new future? So I would start out with something like trying to evaluate your own self. So obviously you probably have a good education, engineering background, or studying to be an engineer. Then we build up knowledge over time. We have a passion for certain things. We have our own strengths and experience. Now, if you try to kind of combine these and figure out what is it that, how do you leverage these things in your future, then you might get somewhere. And that somewhere is somewhere in the future where there might be some roles that we don't even know exist. And I just came up with some of these I shouldn't say fake roles, but potential roles. Like we were talking about ethical AI. So maybe there's an ethicist role. We talked about legal as well, legal aspects of it. Maybe a lawyer. So if you study to become a lawyer, it's okay. You don't have to be a machine learning engineer. You can study to become a lawyer. But if you understand data as part of that law degree, not only understand data, but understand how machines could possibly work at a conceptual level so that you can maybe explain it. And so for explaining, maybe you need the storytelling skills. Because we talked about explainable AI as well. Like Dr. Lakshmanan talked about explainable AI, which is critical in this organization, in any organization. So take the example that I talked about earlier in terms of incorrectly diagnosing or even correctly diagnosing a certain symptom. The patient probably will ask the doctor to explain it. And if the doctor used an AI system to help his or her decision, somebody needs to be able to explain to the patient what's going on. So maybe that's their role. Empathy is another role. You need to be able to relate at a human level. And I've just called out 3 roles, but there are so many others, as you could tell, based on some of the projects that were discussed earlier. We were talking about mapping the flood regions. And if you just think in India, you give appropriate warning. And if you think about that use case and scenario, think about the people who have to be on the ground doing work, who have to communicate with the government officials, who have to set up the partnerships. None of this can be done by AI. AI is very narrow, as some of the discussion threads go. It's called narrow AI because they can solve one problem very well, but they're not generalists yet. And I personally think it'll be a long time before they become generalists. Well, that's a different discussion. the point is, you don't all have to, we all don't have to become a data scientist. We can continue our role, continue our passion, use what we have, but build on it with the knowledge and the idea that in the future, we have to be aware of AI, data, and things of that nature. Just like today, we're aware of software. 20 years back, when we studied engineering, software is not so that big of a deal. Now, probably, even mechanical engineers use software, and so on. Everybody uses software, right? That becomes part and parcel of your life. But we're not software engineers. So that's the point I want to make. And I want to say that, when we talk about AI, in general, AI doesn't exist in isolation either. As that diaper example showed, it uses a lot of other stuff. We need big data. We need the cloud. We need IoT devices that feed the data into the big data so that it can be used on the cloud to build models on the cloud. We may need mobile platforms and so on. So when we look at this set of technologies that are evolving, AI is one of them, and I think it's a very critical part of it, but it cannot exist in isolation. So if you figure out how these technologies work together, or you're an expert in virtual reality, or you're an expert in drones, that makes sense as well. So as engineers, we don't have to all, crowd towards the AI block. We can play roles in other areas as well. So if you take Uber, for example, today, Uber, when it operates, these are companies built on software, technologies that are state here. Uber, for example, needs the cloud. It uses the cloud, it uses AI, it uses data, it uses, I don't know if it uses IoT devices, probably does. It uses mobile devices, uses cybersecurity, probably uses blockchain and all that. All those have to come together to make Uber happen. So that's the point I'm trying to make here. So the future, I think, is going to be a lot more a combination of left and right brain activities. We as engineers, we start out left brain. We like logic, we like systems, we like processes, procedures. But I think we need to start learning a little bit of a right brain kind of activities, like skills like creativity, innovation, leadership, communication, empathy, emotional intelligence, and all that stuff. And that's so that we can complement our left brain and right brain, and also we can complement machine AI and operate as humans in this future world. So in some ways, I think, today my teenagers are illogical. They don't, I don't know if they'll become engineers, probably, but they're so illogical that maybe that's the future. So if you're so illogical, you'll be successful in the future. I don't know that. Nobody knows the future. I'm just guessing. But hope they and everybody else and all the students of the future, all the students of the today succeed in the future. So here too is a shameless plug. I talk about these particular concepts in AI and You, the book, in a much more detailed level. And the main thing is, I want to say that don't just start everything with thinking that you just have to fit everything in a simple framework like a 2x2 matrix, and this makes billions of dollars. The 2x2 framework for management companies makes billions of dollars. So as somebody said, I think Piyush said, if we think in multidimensional, we got $14 trillion that we could be part of. And that's a great opportunity right there. Here's a summary of what we just talked about. So I would say doodle your way to success. There are things more powerful than a 2x2 matrix framework, and wish you the best. Here, I also, if you want a single page copy of this, I have set it up so you can go to the website and you type in ASEI uppercase. You can get that one sheet, downloadable one sheet, if you wanted. With that, think if we have any questions, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. I know there's a bunch of questions that came in because we are kind of running short of time. We'll probably let you answer one because it's coming from a couple of people. then
Okay.
we'll let you answer them through chat. So
Sounds good.
I see a high school student himself asked the same question, and so did Ram. How do you see these type of I would say, this technology as well as thought process? How do you see them getting into our schools for future, for the younger generation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. As we have known, at least our experience has taught us, we have never been taught to think. At least I haven't, and I don't think I know most people have not. And slowly we have the art form of thinking is slowly getting into schools, but not in a deliberate way. And that's the problem. We need to, I love education. I like to make things simple for kids so that they can understand their context. I think what will happen is as technology takes over a lot of structured thinking, we are, as engineers, we're focusing on structured thinking. But slowly there will be a notion of awareness of creativity and innovation and things like that. So how do you model these concepts, these abstract concepts? It's not easy to model, and we haven't really figured this out. But with no other option, the closest I think that'll happen is there's only one way to model these kinds of things, which is visually, so that we can understand it. And perhaps that's one way it'll get into schools. I don't know the answer, but I'm hoping that we'll have the more of the right brain kind of approach. Now, we used to talk so much about STEM. I think schools, at least the ones that I'm working with here locally in supporting them, is we're trying to change STEM to STEAM. The A standing for art, not AI. It stands for art, so that we can bring the art component into schools as well.
Great. So I'll pipe in the rest of the questions through chat, and I'll let you answer.
Sure.
It'll be great. And then thank you again, once again, for joining us. It was very, as you said, it was very simple to understand your presentation, and what a great example to start off with the smart diaper.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. So for the next section, moving on, I'm extremely delighted to introduce our next author of this section of authors in this ASEI's AI Summit. So let me introduce Ashish Bansal, who's an author and director at Twitch. So he has published a book on advanced NLP. NLP stands for natural language processing with TensorFlow 2. Ashish builds content recommendation engines at Twitch and was also previously at Twitter. He was a senior director of data science at Capital One. Prior to joining Capital One, he co-founded Gale Partners, and he headed the machine learning group there. He has had over 19 years of experience in the technology industry, along with an MBA from Kellogg School of Management and a BTech from IIT BHU. His life's ambition, how many people are ready, is to be a Kung Fu master. So I don't want you to hold you from the speech. Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you, everybody. I think my life's ambition is changing. I'm switching. I realized that Kung Fu is too difficult. I am now trying to learn a musical instrument. Many would say that that's not easy or easier, but hey, we will find out and we will learn. So the topic of today's talk is a little bit related to NLP, natural language processing. There has been a lot of interest in natural language processing with the new big models that have come out, especially the GPT-3 and the likes, and there's a lot of media coverage. In various conversations with folks, some of the questions that come out are, hey, how can we use this for our use cases? A number of startups are like, I don't think we could actually train something like GPT-3. I don't have access to the API, it's closely guarded. There are all sorts of questions that are being asked. And I think in media, popular media also, it's being made to look like everything can be solved with a GPT-3 style big language model. So this talk is going to address some of these aspects. As I said, the NLP models are making a lot of headlines. There's a little bit of a visual representation which says like, what do the models look like today? And we can see that the models are at 175 billion parameters or something like that. And the way it has been portrayed to a lot of folks is like, if you have a giant model, it will solve all of world's problems. It always reminds me a little bit of the Hitchhiker's Guide, where the Earth is modeled as a computer. By the time it finds the answer, nobody knows what the question was. And that is, I think, usually apt for a lot of situations in AI and machine learning as well. If you think about how much compute, there is a very nice post by Lambda Labs that talks about the cost, an estimate of cost for training a model like GPT-3, and they peg it at 4.6 using public cloud infrastructure, 4.6 million. Now, if you think about the development process, I'm pretty sure they didn't hit the ball out of the park in the first model they tried. So GPT-3 probably had many, many runs. It's great if your org or your startup has been funded to $1 billion or so. So it's much easier to do that. But it's harder to build it when you are a startup or a smaller organization that doesn't have the same sort of resources. During the course of the talk, I think this can get a little technical. I'll try to keep it a little lighter, and I would appreciate as many questions as folks have. So I intend to spend a little more time on questions and answering questions, because it seems like there's a lot of engagement on the questions front. So please keep the questions coming. So if you don't have these types of resources, is building larger models the only way forward? Another question is, how many such large models do we really need in the world? Is large number of parameters the main reason for performance? How about data sets? Can we train a large model with a small data set, or vice versa? If I need a large data set, then how do I ensure the quality of such a data set? These are very important problems that I think any model builder, not even just in NLP, needs to consider when they are thinking about building some of any NLP, any AI or ML model. I tend to use the term machine learning more than AI, and that's more, I think, of a personal preference. I find AI to be overly broad and misused as a practitioner, so I try to stick towards machine learning, which has more theoretical foundations. So one thing that we know, that if we want to train a very large model, we need a very large data set. One of the advantages of natural language processing, or NLP, has been that we do have very large natural language data sets. We have been doing the task of digitization of information for several decades now. Most of the information in an enterprise is digitized in some form or fashion, in a document, inside some app, in some database. The Library of Congress is digitizing books, Google Books and Google Scholar is digitizing all of the papers that are published. You have digital versions of them. So finding a large amount of text to train an NLP model specifically, and I'm referring to NLP specifically, is not hard in this world. What is hard? What is hard is having a labeled data set for training on something. So let's say that you want a large number of movie reviews. You can source a large number of movie reviews. What is harder to do is figure out how to get a large number of labeled movie reviews with a positive or a negative sentiment. That is much harder. Similarly, it is possible to get a lot of call transcripts for like maybe a sales call. And if you're trying to build a B2B sales pipeline predictor model, it's much harder to say this call is labeled as successful or unsuccessful or converting into X dollars of revenue and so on and so forth. I think that's the first big problem. The second big problem that I think everybody needs to be aware of while building such models is the role of bias that these models have. And I would go further than just bias and say that there is also a role of misinformation when it comes to text. A lot of media attention has been paid on these GPT-3 BERT style models, and I don't think enough attention has been paid on the misinformation aspect of this. So let me give you some details, and folks that have read the GPT-3 paper are probably aware of this. They crawled the web and got all the text. That's a very simple one-level explanation. Now you can say that, hey, but the internet is full of half-truths and mistruths and things like that. So how did they guard against it? So what the folks at OpenAI did was they used Reddit. And they said that if a link was shared on Reddit, and on an average, the upvotes on Reddit were more than the downvotes. So it had a net positive score. If you subtract downvotes from the upvotes, we will treat it as verifiable or verified information or good quality information. I am sure that raises some questions in your mind. It definitely raises some questions in my mind as to, is this really verifiable or verified information that we are training our data set on? And consequently, does it really reflect or represent the state of the world? And when I train a model on it, is it going to have less bias or not bias, reflect it as things should ideally be? Those answers are hard to find. So that's, I think, the first suggestion I have for audience here is to be very deliberate about your data sets. It's much better to have a smaller, high quality data set in many domains, specifically if you're looking at anything to do with medicine or medical or decision support systems, than to have a larger, lower quality data set. Moving on, I wanted to highlight a few things that are routinely not covered on the large amounts of data and these data sets that are used and the models that are built using that. As I went through and as I was in the process of writing my book, I was analyzing all of these papers, and I realized that you have this paper that establishes a new state of the art in the field. You go through the paper, and I always think that going through some of the papers today is like going through financial reports. The best stuff is hidden in the appendices and the footnotes. You go through those papers and you realize that there are so many tricks that contribute to something becoming state of the art, yet the attribution is towards one or two things. And I want to just highlight a couple of things here in the context of natural language processing. There is a very simple thing around tokenization that we need to think about. I'll just talk about the tokenization. For people who are used to reading English, I think everybody here can read English. If asked to take a sentence and convert it into or segment it into words, I think we can all very simply do it by just looking at spaces and punctuations like dots, full stops, and exclamation marks. There are a large number of languages, or I should say there's a large number of speakers for certain languages where the scheme does not work. Japanese, Chinese are the prominent ones. So even a simple thing like what is a word is not a simple answer, right? Models that you have, any models that you build are limited in the how many words or tokens can you pass through. So there is always some truncation that you need to do. And it's a very interesting example that I'll share with you. I was building this model. It's a very popular data set called the IMDb movie review data set. It's used in a lot of tutorials. And the idea behind that data set is that you take the reviews and then you try to classify the review into a positive or a negative sentiment. The challenge is, how do you know which side to truncate if it's a very long review? And the two choices are, if let's say that I can only pass 20 words into my model. All models have some limits. I think the latest limits are around 2048 words or so. But let's say my model has 20 words. Now in 20 words, and my review is 40 words, let's say, should I take the first 20, the middle 20, or the last 20? In other words, should I truncate from the right, the left, or from both sides equally? And just to give you a sense, for a movie review, if I truncate from the left, so I chop off the first few words and keep the words at the bottom, that gives me much higher accuracy than chopping everything from the right. The reason for that is the way you think of writing a review is that the punchline of the review, which is what is the conclusion, is usually at the end. And the context of the review, what is the movie about and things like that, is usually at the front. So even a simple thing like truncation of text can get you about a percentage point of accuracy difference in your models. There is stuff about creating self-supervised data sets, learning rate annealing. Those are all very interesting topics that we can definitely cover. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of tokenization. And some people call it as the dark horse of NLP, the idea of the byte pair encoding or word piece encoding. So what we have here is a simple English sentence. The hare jumped over the dog. There are two ways that we could tokenize this. The first is through words and the second is through characters. Why do we need to tokenize in the first place? Because computers have no intrinsic understanding of language. They only work with numbers. And the best, if I were to ask anybody to convert a word or a piece of text into numbers, we have a scheme called the ASCII character set or the UTF character set or something like that, that converts and that just assigns a code, right? So intrinsically, the computers have no idea that this collection of codes or a sequence of codes, like hare, H-A-R-E, means a rabbit, right? So to computer, it just means a number of things. So what we need to do is we need to build a representation. That is why NLP is complex, because before you can do actual learning, you have to first create a representation of text and then build a model on top. If you contrast that to computer vision, the value of a pixel in RGB, let's say we have 3 channels, is sufficient. You don't need to do something specific or more on top of that. Let's take an example of the Japanese piece of text, Election Administration Committee. So in the Japanese script, you can actually have 2 different tokenizations, and they're written based on the context. Now, let me take an example from German. I do not claim to know German or Japanese, but these are things that I've seen in my work. You can create compound words in German. So now once you get into compound words, then you basically end up with an unlimited vocabulary, right? Because I can keep creating these new words. And if I'm trying to create some sort of representation which relies on some sort of a lookup, then my lookup will be millions and millions of code tables long, and that will make my model super complex. Now, that's where I think the main benefit that was or the main approach that I think BERT paper pioneered was using a scheme called BPE, or byte pair encoding. It's actually from information theory. So it's a technique that's used for compression of text, but applies very well because you can think of BPE as breaking it up into all of these, into the words, into individual tokens. So you can think of, like, if you say committee, if you say let's meeting is a word, then you can break it up into 2 parts, meet and ing. And you will find that there's a lot of words that end with ing. So I've now suddenly reduced the number of tokens that I need to represent something here. In practical experience, if you remove BPE or word piece encoding from BERT or from GPT, their performance will fall significantly, over 20 percentage points. I'm actually running some experiments right now. I don't have the data. I was talking to Piyush earlier during the week. I wanted to finish my experiments so that I can actually give you data. Unfortunately, as an individual person running a small NVIDIA GPU under my desk, it's much harder for me to train some of these models. But there's a very large discrepancy in difference. So even if you have a GPT-3 type model without word piece encoding, it doesn't work. And the message that I'm trying to push is if you are building a product using NLP, it's very easy for you to use word piece and get those benefits as opposed to using fixed vocabulary. There's a little bit of information more into how BPE works. I'm happy to cover that if folks are interested through Q&A and answer those questions. Now, we were talking about truncation schemes. So I'm just giving you an example of two different reviews. These are reviews. This is one review that I got for my book. So I'm just highlighting what happens if you take the first 30 words and the last 30 words, right? So just as a thought exercise, just think about how does this work? And if you are going to build a model for yourself, if you do not have a large amount of compute capacity, then the challenge that you will face is you will have to truncate and you'll have to use a smaller model size and smaller input size. And consequently, you have to now think about where should I truncate from? And hopefully by looking at this, you should get some intuitive understanding in this particular case, how truncation would impact. And in the future, in your particular use case, you can also think about how truncation impacts. Now, I just did something simple. I took the same review and using Google Translate, I converted and translated into Arabic. Again, I do not claim to be an Arabic speaker. But if we thought that truncating from the first 30 or last 30, a lot of the literature that is written in the world today is focused on English or let's say Latin languages or Latin-based languages. When you look at a right to left language like Arabic, suddenly the meanings of first 30 and last 30 take very different meanings because mostly people will implement the first 30 as from the left, which are two very different things once you start thinking about different languages around for this work. So another area which is going to answer this, and there's a bunch of questions in chat that I see from Peter and Tia, and I think I'll use this to answer these questions. What has happened is traditionally what we do is we look at this scheme. In traditional machine learning, we have a task and we build a model for that task. So we have a labeled set of data for this particular task and we train the model on that task. If I have 3 tasks, I've trained 3 models. Instead, what transfer learning does, and transfer learning is something that is, I would say, hugely responsible for the massive progress that we have made in computer vision. And now we are seeing transfer learning being applied to NLP as well at scale, is I can train a bunch of different models, a model with a bunch of different data sets, which are optimized to different objectives and be able to transfer some of this knowledge or this learning across. There was some discussion from the previous speakers about this as well, which is that if I'm trying to, like as a person, I may not choose to jump off a building, even though I don't have any direct evidence or experience of knowing the harm from jumping off a building. So what we see is this ability to generalize a situation and extrapolate from that situation. In a way, you can say that transfer learning helps you do something like that. So let me answer these the couple of questions that we have here. So Peter, your question was GPT-3 has been available for a while. I mean, it feels like it's been available for a while, but I don't think it's been over a year yet for it to be there. The question I think I would like to ask is, and I know several use cases, but they are not published of companies who have benchmarked custom models against GPT-3, and the custom model works better than GPT-3. So the question really is that what is the motivation of OpenAI to publish GPT-3, and what is a consumer of that model perspective of using it? For OpenAI, it is much easier for them to have one model because they are a SaaS vendor than a different model for every single use case. And if they can get by with few shot or one shot learning, like very few examples, that it helps a number of different users. From a consumer perspective, if I have the ability to train a custom model and I have the sophistication to train the custom model, then it is always going to work out much better for me. So it's again a question of what are the motivations. In terms of deficiencies, I think the data set is a very big deficiency. The size of the model, I think it's severely over parameterized. What I mean by severely over parameterized, I mean that the amount of information it contains and the amount of parameters or data that or space that it takes to store that information is out of whack. It takes way more space to store very little information. And I'm happy to answer more specific questions about that. TI, that's exactly what I'm saying is in specific use cases. For example, there is something called as clinical BERT. So BERT is a general purpose model trained across general English, but it's possible for you to only pass medical texts through it. And then you might end up with something called as clinical BERT or medical BERT. If you are able to use this transfer learning approach in your domain, if you have a lot of data in your domain, you may not have enough label data. In that case, you can use some self-supervised training formulations, which I think is a huge part of what is making these models work. And it is very easy to construct these self-supervised training formulations. There was earlier questions around from Venkat around labeling and unlabeled data. So I'm trying to answer that in the context of NLP, that it is possible for you to construct self-supervised objectives. So one common objective that is used in BERT and GPT is next sentence prediction. If I have a paragraph, I can remove the last sentence of the paragraph, give the rest of the first n sentences of the paragraph to the model and say, predict and try to complete this sentence. This is very similar to as kids, we used to have these filling the blank problems. We used to have, can you complete this story problems, which are ways for us to learn language. These models are trained on something like that. The fill in the blank model is called masked language model in BERT. So if you want to appear smart, say masked language model. If you want to make sure that people understand what you're saying, say fill in the blank. It is the same objective. We just take a sentence, we mask randomly 15% of the tokens in that sentence, replace them with a star, and ask the model to fill in that blank. Now, an unsupervised data set has become supervised for us. So yes, you can get very good performance with smaller networks. It will be much more efficient to train. It will be much more friendly to your budget and to the environment. And you might have much better performance as a consequence.
Thank you.
Just to quickly summarize, Muthu, this is my last slide.
Sure.
So just quickly summarizing, there is a lot of discussions in media about big models. Many of the tricks that the big models use, you can use for any size of model. Don't be caught up in all of the media attention that these models get. These small tricks, if you remove them, these models will not be worth much. Is the conclusion that I wanted to say. And a large model can be beaten by a small task-focused model with enough training data.
Wow, quite insightful. Although it looks very simple, it is quite complicated. And thanks for dissecting all that for us. it's been great to have you as part of the authors section of this AI Summit. For the rest of the questions, we see more and more coming in. Please engage in the chat and the Q&A section to reply to those questions directly. Again, thanks a lot, Ashish. It was great to have you. And this concludes our authors section. And over to you, Vatsala and Piyush. Thank you.
So moving on, ethics at the forefront. Building responsibly means that AI outcomes and predictions are ethical, fair, and inclusive. We now present to you a panel of 3 lively, dynamic women talking about AI ethics and innovation in the enterprise. We have Priyanka Jain, the president and founder, Airing, Bala Sahejpal, senior vice president at DataRobot, and Dr. Sindhu Joseph, CEO and founder, Cognicore Technologies. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Vatsala. So this is going to be exciting. Quite a few of us are very passionate about AI, and then layer ethics on top of that. So maybe we can start with a quick introduction and then get to the meat of it. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Bala?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be and discussing with Priyanka and the rest of you. I have been in the data and analytics world for the last 20 years, and over the years have seen it, going to the cloud and seeing the explosion of data, where data has become a foundation to drive data-driven cultures and decision making. And over the last 5 years, it's all about how we scale with AI and how do we look at implementing AI models as well as governance in the companies. And recently, I joined DataRobot because the product is AI and very excited about it. So thanks, Priyanka.
That's exciting. Sindhu?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sindhu Joseph, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cognicore. It has been a really exciting sessions and talks. Earlier, I also listened to Dr. Sundar, who is spoke a lot about ethics. So I think this is a great segue from that conversation. So my background is in again, as many of you, in artificial intelligence. I have a PhD in AI and spent around 20 years working in this field, both from an academic perspective as well as from us building a company from lab to kind of launch space as well. I also have invented 6 patents in machine learning and natural language processing, and have, Ashish provided a very good, overview of many of the technologies. And my perspective here is, first, one is having been in the industry and academic world and collaborated in different set of government as well as industry collaborations, how AI can be used from both from a consumer perspective as well as from someone who is developing this kind of technologies in an ethical way. So that is one perspective that I would like to bring to the table. And a second is I have been my PhD was, I did my PhD in Barcelona. I was born and brought up in India, and right now I'm in California in Palo Alto. So I bring that different perspective, how Europe is kind of treating AI and ethics and some of the key questions. I think Sundar also talked about some of those regulations that they have brought along, and how in the US that we have been encountered with some of these questions. So those are some of the perspective that I would like to bring along. And finally, the entrepreneur mindset, I have seen large companies, some of the perspectives from Google and so on, and Ashish also provided, how these huge models, both from a computational aspect perspective, as well as using the data perspective, how these models are taking the mainstream. And I'm a little frustrated with that approach alone. And I believe there are, huge possibilities in other parts of AI, which are explanatory, unbiased models that we can create. So those are my perspectives. Sorry for the longer introduction, but those are the things that I bring to the table.
That's great. We have a lot to talk about between you guys, Bala, Sindhu, and me. A quick introduction on me. I've been in data science for couple of decades. So I'm dating myself. My 2 masters and my thesis 20 years ago was in AI. Whatever AI was at 20 years ago, with very little compute, when we would submit code at night and see what we have been able to do in the morning. And since then, been working with in the corporate world. My last corporate role before I founded A-Ring was at PayPal. I was heading up business analytics there for North America. That was 9 years ago, and so 9-10 years. For the last 9-10 years, I've been working at A-Ring, doing a lot of fun machine learning AI application via data science consulting, as well as a big focus on data literacy. So that's kind of my interest. And the other aspect which I wanted to share quickly is my perspective and my approach is mostly practical data science. So though I love algorithms and I came from the academic world, for me, it's all about practical. How can I put data to work? And that's why sometimes simple logic, correlation analysis is far better in my experience than something more complex in statistical modeling, machine learning, and AI. But there's space for all of them. So that sort of is what the perspective I'll bring into this conversation. So let me start with this very public spat which happened a few years ago between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, where Elon Musk said, as a society, we need to be careful about AI. And then, Mark kind of offline rebuked back on that, saying, hey, naysayers, AI is all good, and so on. And then kind of Elon talked about, rebuked back saying, Mark's understanding is a little limited. And he's specifically talking about, like, in all the industries, once the industry grows, then the regulators, and then some fiasco happens, and then the regulators come in and say, okay, let's clean it up. Let's start thinking about governance and ethics and so on. But Elon's perspective was, by the time this happens in the space of AI, it'll be too late. So if anybody would know about AI, these will be 2 industry giants who are using AI at scale, Facebook and Tesla, of course. So what's your perspective? Let's start from you, Bala. What's your perspective? Is AI, perils, AI ethics perils, or, it's all good, it's just overhyped?
No, it's a great question, and it's something which is very important right now when we deploy AI and scale with AI to fuel digital transformation, and even not just digital transformation. It's like industries like healthcare. I think trust is one of the I would say important factor nowadays. Traditionally, we have been looking at AI models and we have been asking these questions in the meetings: how accurate this model is. Is it fair? If the use case is related to, facial recognition or something like gender. But I think mainstream, these questions need to be embraced when you discuss, AI and the use cases and the models, and embark on this journey that, okay, what is the impact are we going to do? Are we going to trust this? And I think when you said Elon Musk, I have been a Tesla driver for the last 7 years, and I've been driving autopilot. I think it was the first thing when I started using the technology that, am I going to trust this? And I think the same question comes in when we are looking at AI in our, day-to-day roles and companies to scale that. So it's not overhyped. I think it's right to discuss that. And according to me, trust and ethical AI is something which is going to be more, I would say, invested in by companies who are using AI, as well as the companies and the vendors who are generating models.
That's great. Sindhu?
So I think, from a, especially on the discussion of, Elon Musk and Mark, one aspect that I would like to highlight is, Mark is probably right from the perspective of, from a technology evolution, previously, I think Dr. Raj also discussed, our cognitive understanding and AI's cognitive understanding. There is a huge gap that AI needs to fill in terms of reaching that kind of a cognitive gap. Even the GPT language models, like although it generates all of these beautiful languages, the understanding that these AI models have is near zero. So from that perspective, yes, Mark is right, and probably I would agree with that. But Elon is more right in the sense that this has huge consequences. Even when we are building this kind of rudimentary AI models and trying to create automation using AI, what we don't realize is what we are trying to do is, AI is providing a scalable services, scalable automation for us, but it also scale and amplifies whatever societal bias, whatever risk that we already have. Like, all of those things are getting amplified, getting scaled at a pace that, we are not even able to imagine. And that's why I think, unlike other evolutions like industrial revolution and things like that, this is going at a pace that not many of us can imagine, and that's where I think ethics has to catch up pretty fast.
Yeah, and that's a very important perspective. By the way, that spat happened before Cambridge, before riots in Myanmar, before riots in January at the Capitol Hill. That all that, I guess Mark got a lesson or two, hopefully, in just the perspective of what happens when there are biases. Specifically with Facebook, the models were built to drive growth and engagement. And from the content perspective, what drives growth and engagement was very polarizing content and actually misinformation, because when you're seen in misinformation, you reply back, you have an immediate urge to reply back, or you want to rebut that or refute it. And so thereby the models were actually amplifying polarizing content, which led to these fiascos which happened. So it's very powerful. And unless you understand, because they are layered models, thousands of them at scale, which is happening and which is getting deployed because of the Facebook technology, which is getting deployed by engineers who had, again, very little understanding of the inherent biases that they were amplifying. And it was also very focused towards growth. So exactly, that's why probably the ethics come into picture is what is your guiding principle? What are we driving towards? And the consequences we saw. And to some extent, I think there was another incident probably a few years back when, and I think it was again at Facebook, where the chat bots that Facebook was working on chat bots, and they were learning, obviously it was AI, and they started using English, and they developed their own language using English words which were unintelligible to humans, and they had to shut down the entire chatbot system. So yes, there's a big gap between cognitive abilities between human and AI. However, having said that, there is a great peril in letting things learn without necessarily having these boundaries and constraints that potentially, if you don't think about it, it'll come back and hit you in your face, I think. So, and specifically because AI, like you said, Sindhu, it's just growing at such a huge, the acceleration is remarkable because it's self-learning and there's so much data to be playing with. So let me go back to you, Sindhu, from your perspective. What are, if you could name, let's say, top 3, what are the big ethical challenges in AI today?
Yeah, so I would like to kind of, put this in two kind of perspectives. One is a higher level perspective of, what are the bigger challenges. And I would start naming the first one, which is the historic bias that we already have, because we are not a human society that is, a really fair society. We have been taking all ethical decisions so far, we have been treating gender, racial, socioeconomic, very fairly. If that was the case, then AI, all it has to do was basically, kind of mimic that or just translate that into AI systems. the problem starts with this kind of historic bias. And then we are all of a sudden trying to say that, AI has to be, algorithm has to be fair, transparent, explainable, and so on. So this is kind of a little bit of unfairness to the AI algorithms, given that we humans already have that bias. So how do we bridge that gap from a historic bias to us as a society? We are looking to improve ourselves, and how do we incorporate AI into that kind of journey? So that, I think, is a kind of a broader perspective. That is one huge challenge that we have to overcome in terms of addressing ethical challenges. And second, I think, is one of the biggest problem that we have is when we are addressing these challenges. The problem is, like, we are working with a number of stakeholders. One is the people who are building these kind of AI models and selling this kind of solutions to both consumers, businesses, and so on. And then we have these models themselves. We have a huge amount of data. So these are some of the one part of the stakeholders. Then we have different organizations, regulations, and so on. So all of this, like, how do we bring them together to provide a framework for operating within this ethical space? So just to give you a little bit of, like, how we can start from the place where the developer space, or, like, how we can start from an education space. Like, I come from an institution. When I started my PhD, we took an oath. It is similar to how doctors take their oath in terms of, like, you use your learnings and your skills to protect and do good for the society. So likewise, we, as being trained in AI, we take an oath that in the institute, I did it in Barcelona, and we started with an oath saying that we will use AI only for the good of the society. And also it included one step further, which I don't think people here agree. We won't use it for military purposes. So these two were, like, kind of an oath for life, and you would abide by that. So I think starting from that to going to developers, it's very hard for them to think that how do you as a developer, as an innovator, I would always think, can I build something? How do I build something? But I don't never ask the question, is it right to build that thing? So it is a little bit harder for us to think from that perspective. So bringing that mindset and so on. So going up to the regulatory scheme, it is a huge challenge at the global perspective. So I would say those are at a higher dimension. Those are the bigger challenges from an ethical perspective.
So what I heard, Sindhu, was there was obviously a historical bias, which obviously all predictive models, past predicts future, and that's inherent in whether before even AI. Our credit, the way we used to extend credit with even simple regression model, it was the same challenge that we have, that whoever we have been giving the credit to, we will keep continuing giving in future. So that's an extension of an earlier problem, which is a historical bias, because we are building on history. And the other part that you talked about was how to bring this understanding of, in a way, understanding of what is it that we want to create. While AI models are highly unexplainable and layered, how do we bring that understanding of what is the consequence of this, getting the perspective of from the human, regulatory, society, as well as technology and business. So that was sort of what I heard. What's your perspective, Bala?
So as a I would say consumer of AI and implementing AI models in the company, I think we forget to ask these questions, which are very important, that what is the ethical purpose of doing this? And I think the AI for good is a great example. But then obviously there are so many use cases out there where, AI is being tested and implemented. in defense and in federal government, in healthcare. And I think where we need to look at is beyond accuracy, the fairness part of it, the disclosures part of it. And that's where, Sindhu, you touched the regulatory compliance. I think it's very important to treat legal and security being two integral pillars when you talk about ethical AI or ethics in AI. And I think changing that mindset from accuracy, which was a common, I would say, a qualifier of deploying a model, to the rest of the criterias is very important so that you can trust. And I do see some questions coming in the chat that, you know what, some of that use cases. And I think that's where a lot of work has to be done, where what are the ethical AI use cases, and what is it that it will drive the impact to the organization, to the society, to the community, to the country. So when you start looking at a use case, you just don't look at as an innovation challenge. You look at a holistic picture.
And to be fair, Bala, I mean, as an engineer, let's say I was as part of Facebook, and I was just going back to our prior example, and if I was just, it looks very harmless. I'm just going for engagement and growth, right? So there's in the setting up of that problem. Let's use this model to promote content or rank it higher, those which are more engaging, those which are getting more likes and comments. So in the outset of it, this problem seems, and we are going to drive growth with it. I think it looks very, very innocuous, very, very harmless to me. The challenge that basically why it blew on our face is because of the consequence of it, which was almost like a side effect which people hadn't thought about. And it can happen at scale with AI versus, you and I talking and having some, maybe I have a racial bias or whatever else. There's very little scale there versus the scale that, obviously these giant companies having the kind of membership and subscribership they have. There's another scale and the data that it produces. So I think my pushback to both of you is thinking it from the ethical perspective. That's fine. But most of the time we are generally speaking, from a business perspective, we are pretty ethical. We are driving growth. We are looking at revenue. We're never like, unless we are in the deepfake side of it or on the other extremist side of it, we are mostly looking at, very, very logical business outcomes. I want to drive growth. I want to drive revenue. I want to drive subscriber, reduce my churn. I want to, even chatbots, using chatbots to reduce my call volume. These are very, very innocuous. So how do you take that perspective of ethics and sort of round out as you begin your journey on AI, as you begin thinking about, I need to do a deployment beyond my statistical modeling. Let's say I want to get into machine learning and AI. Where does the ethic come in picture, or how do you roll it?
I'll take that, Sindhu, because I basically look at this day in and out now. I think the examples you gave are great examples where we have seen a lot of maturity and a lot of business processes being scaling with AI. And I think that's the next segue of a very important conversation, which is what is a governance in AI? So when we talk about a churn model, or when we talk about growth, or we talk about driving revenue, we are not looking at adversely affecting something if a black swan event occurs, or sometimes a model can behave unexpectedly, but we have path to recovery. But here it's all about now making sure that, okay, we are putting some steps in governing the models. I think we have spent a lot of, there are a lot of capabilities out there in the data space. Like when we talk about data and analytics, we talk about data quality naturally. We'll talk about data governance, data management naturally. But when it comes to the AI, work flows, the privacy part of the AI, when we are looking at, using training sets, which has PII information, we now need to talk about how do we secure that? How do we make sure that not only just the training data set is fair and the training data set is governed, but the outputs of that, the predictions we are looking at, are also basically looked at and governed. And I think Sindhu will have a great perspective on it, given that, she lives in and out on the AI models. But for us leaders who look at, scaling with AI models, for us now, governance has become the biggest important, factor.
And the fact, I think what the aspect that you're talking specifically about is about privacy and making sure that there's governance around privacy, which, the governance around data has similar translation when you move it to on the AI side. But as you specifically think about governance on AI model, do you, minus the PII, minus the privacy aspect, which obviously don't use PII and whatever else, and don't build your biases, which you shouldn't be using race information, whatever else. But where does the AI governance, Bala, from your perspective, is that at the onset of building model that you're thinking about AI governance? Or is it, some event happens and you're kind of being able to trace back and be able to stop that halfway through? Like where does AI governance start from your perspective as you're thinking outside of the privacy aspect?
No, it's a very good question. I think privacy is something which we all talk about, but I think when I was talking about governance, it's the end-to-end, Priyanka. It's about thinking what are the training sets we are using, what are the pipes, what are the workflows, are we governing the access, are we going through the reviews, are we compliant in using the data, are we monitoring the models after deployment? How are we making sure that the behavior of the model is being looked at on a fairness perspective and on a regular perspective? Is it behaving as per the benchmarks we see when we started thinking about this particular use case? So it's not just about, we talked about ethics when we started thinking about a use case, but now it's the journey of AI in the companies where you need to start looking at governance across the board till the end. And it's a living thing. You cannot just deploy a model and say, okay, it's going to work. It's again, the human angle of monitoring comes into picture. So I'm sure Sindhu, you would have seen it from after the deployment also, you need to take care of the models.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I would just like to, I think, all what you said, I completely agree. I would just like to add one, one precursor to that. Like, I think it starts not when when we are thinking about a problem, not when we are thinking about a model, but when we are building a team. So I think it should start from there because our ability to ask questions depends on what kind of a team we have. Just to give you an example, like I was I love to travel, and that's one of the reasons why I took this big journey from India to Europe to now in the US. When we started the company initially in Barcelona, we had set up a team of 15 members, and I knew that I'm going to build this AI platform that is going to kind of revolutionize how people are engaging with large enterprises. And the 15-member team had 12 nationalities. So both men and women and 12 nationalities. We had a great time, but the crux of the message is that when we have these different perspectives from different corners of the world, then the questions that get asked is, it's much more exciting, much more enriching. And that's when we take care of our biases. That's when we take care of all the other aspects that are, somehow inherently being built in the models or in the data. So I think we have to start from there, but everything else, I do completely agree.
Yeah, and I think what you're really pointing to, and that's why inclusion and diversity, whether it's multicultural or multi-perspective or different backgrounds, when I also talk a lot about hypotheses as we begin to solve a problem, and that multicultural, multi everything background specifically enables us to look at the problem from very different and differing perspective. And potentially, as you're thinking about even setting up the problem, and you start writing about constraints, business constraints, and what it needs to be able to do, this is a good opportunity to think through those constraints prior. My perspective is that AI governance starts upfront, way upfront. You're thinking, I think, Sindhu, from the team perspective. I'm thinking more from the perspective of as you formulate the business problem, as you even lay out your analysis plan, as you start thinking about your success metrics and so on and so forth, there's also a place for constraints and what it needs to deliver. Start thinking about what is it that you should be monitoring for? What is the side effect? those, and you can only manage what you can measure. If you don't measure that side effect minus the main effect, main effect is growth or churn or whatever else. The side effects, if you don't really think about those side effects beforehand and you're not measuring it, it really has to become that big that you're in the news, and you don't want to be in the news for the wrong reason. So, I think that thinking through, from my perspective, you start thinking about AI governance at that, at business problem analysis plan stage, much like you think about success metrics, much like you're thinking about hypotheses. You think about constraints. You think about what is it that we cannot, this model should not be able to do. And actually in AI, given how the technology works, you can penalize behavior that you don't want it to happen. You can build in loss functions, and you can do all those things if you have thought through it. If you've thought about what it should not, what is an effect that you don't want to happen. And constant monitoring, I think, Bala, that you were talking about is also also very helpful. I think one other point, I think we were talking offline, Sindhu, and we talked about historical biases. You talked about how not to use historical and another approach to AI. I'm very interested in that. So would love to hear more.
Yeah, I think there are some, questions as well, like, whether, I think it was around ML models, how should we, think about these ML models, I'm sure there are, a lot of perspectives, but I think a couple of points that I wanted to kind of highlight is AI is not machine learning. So, a machine learning, I think, we heard from a lot of experts today that machine learning is just one branch of AI where we are using historic data to kind of predict the future. There are other models that unfortunately has not got a lot of attention in the second or third wave of AI, and those models are using some of the human kind of reasoning, which is like you have this kind of general theories, and you are able to deduce information or more specialized contextual information from that kind of thing. You apply to a particular specific context from the general theory. So previously, I think Dr. Raj mentioned about, you don't, as a human or even as a baby, you don't jump from a tall building. But that is basically some of our, knowledge that we as human beings, like, we have these kind of theories, like, we can say that a human doesn't fly, Priyanka is a human, so she doesn't fly. So those kinds of very high level logical information can be brought into this kind of decision making. So you don't always need to have these, huge historical biased, unlabeled data to always start with. You can combine these two paradigms. And one of the efforts that Cognicore has done in this space is like, we have really tried to combine creating a cognitive mapping between, certain business domains to a knowledge graph. And these knowledge graph kind of powering many of our, driving our automation, driving our conversations, driving our learning using deductive reasoning as well. So I'm not saying that, we should entirely go for deductive reasoning or, more old-fashioned learning. But I think we can, very cleverly combine these two things. And some of the things which we for example, to give you one, very small example, like if I try to teach AI a cup of, just a simple cup, and I give very different lot of examples, a huge amount of data, and it recognizes cups in different shapes, sizes, and so on. But the fact that, I can pour water into the cup or I can pour coffee into the cup, that is not really learned from any of these examples. So there are some things that, you have to, treat it in a different level, and that kind of a layering has to happen. And this comes with a lot of advantages, like explainability. You can really easily explain the entire thing using this kind of a knowledge graph kind of approach. So I would, I'm a little, as I mentioned in the beginning, disappointed that the large tech firms like Google, Facebook, everybody is like pouring money into this kind of huge models, which require a huge amount of data. And that's the only model that we are going to work with, but, not really completely ignoring other things which both from an environmental perspective, computational cost perspective, as well as from explainability, unbiased perspective. Like there is huge advantages of that. So I think there should be we should have a lot more of symbiotic relationship happening between these two field of interactions.
That's a very good point. And if you think historically, Sindhu, when, even way back 10, 20, 30 years ago, when there was a whole body of work around predictive analytics, which was using historical data to predict stuff. But there's a whole body of things around which, for example, Optimizer. An Optimizer very easily uses this knowledge information. If this happens, then this happens, or there is a, or even stochastic probabilities as a feed into the Optimizer. That's all an example of not using data. You're not using past data. And to some of the comments, when you're talking about what the world should be, you can use these knowledge, sort of knowledge maps, or the heuristics, or the our understanding of how world should be, to code it into systems, which can then potentially also, and that married to a historic data approach, labeled historic data approach, can be a great hybrid where we start almost like shaping up where we want this to go, versus saying just let's see how the data turns out, or let's see how the model turns out, give it data and let's see how it turns out. So I think that's a very, very important and great perspective. One last thing that I want to talk about before we sort of take questions is shifting gears a little bit, innovation. How do you see, Bala, from your perspective, innovation while in the space of AI and ethics?
So before we go to innovation, I wanted to add something about what we just talked about. That one of the important ingredient in while we are discussing ethics today is explainability and trustability, and traceability too. So I think I'm not going to go into details given we are running out of time, and we should take questions. But these are the three important, criteria when you look at vendors, when you look at products, when you look at deploying yourself, or you have data scientists. Make sure that, okay, we looked at these three pillars very carefully, that, okay, can we explain the data? Can we explain the results? Can we explain the model? And then can we trace it back, as you said, to the human behavior or the data which we are trying to model and the outcome we are trying to get to. But going to innovation, I think COVID does speed up a lot of usage of AI with some challenges we have faced in the community and the country. I think preventing future pandemics now, while we have schools doing remote learning, there's a lot of innovation in there that, okay, how we would drive now the right outcomes with distance learning. And obviously healthcare is, I would say, fueling with use cases now, making sure that we are able to, diagnose as well as offer quite a bit of capabilities remotely. So I'm sure that, okay, we would see a lot of innovations in this spaces, but overall, I think there's a lot of hunger, and that's why the ethics has become a very important while innovation.
That's a very fair point, Sindhu.
Yeah, your question is on innovation on ethics, right? Or like,
yes.
I think, what I'm like, really expecting to come, people in entrepreneurs to come out with is a framework, a platform for you basically give any model, any implementation of AI, and you can plug into this platform and it comes out saying that it is 10% biased, it's 20% explainable, and so on. So I'm sure this is going to be $1 billion company that is soon going to come out with that. And there are, in the machine learning space, there are you can basically measure the feature impact, what kind of features basically influence the decision making and so on. So you can really, plot all those things. And in the other side, symbolic kind of reasoning, you can, basically explain all your decisions. So I think you can really put in your characteristics of your data, put in your characteristics of the model, and it will tell you. So I think there would be this kind of consolidated platforms, both used by regulatory authorities as well as everyone who's selling artificial intelligence. And I think that would be the direction in which the innovation in ethics will go.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Yeah, go ahead, Bola.
No, I was just going to give you a little bit of fun fact that the reason I joined DataRobot because of the trusted and the ethical AI work they are doing, and it resonates very, inside the company we talk about the trust score. How do we trust the models? And we clearly are leading that space. But I think this is where you would see a lot of work coming on. That okay, how does you build trust, and how do you give a score? How do you make sure that the models are audited? And I'm sure that there's quite a bit of legislations coming in now, making sure that, okay, we audit all the models which are being used by not just the government, but the state for important decision-making. Priyanka, go ahead.
And some of the industries, like fintech they're highly regulated. So, unfortunately, they also feel limited by how much AI they can use because of that whole explainability perspective, and perhaps it's sort of tampering with their ability to innovate. But like specifically talking about innovation in AI ethics, this is a pretty, I think it's a very cute and smart idea about having that kind of score, just like you have a FICO score, having that ethics score that should come out. And if you think about use cases of AI all around us, thinking about drones and thinking about self-driving car like Tesla you're talking about, I think the world that we are in future going for will be more and more dependent on AI. I mean, we don't even think as we use OK Google and Hey Alexa and many other systems that we are on an everyday basis we are using, but we are not really thinking that they are, of course, listening, and they are, of course, your information is out there. You talk to a friend over Alexa and talked about going for a hike, and then you log into Facebook and you get an ad for some tours talking about hike. There's a lot of listening going on, and a lot of it is it's not necessarily overtly, the permissionings are not overt permissionings and so on. So there's a lot of room to grow still in ethics. And I think the blueprint of an organization, a lot of it is governed by, as of now, organizations and their own blueprints is governing it, versus a regulator outside who's saying this is done, this is good and this is not, and this is allowed or not. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of AI ethics, and what does that even mean? What does good mean? What does bad mean? What does should be mean? What does should not be mean? So there's a lot of space for us to still grow and think through. So I think that was I think we might be at time, and if there are opportunities for us to talk and answer more questions, Vatsal, over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, ladies, for the ethically engaging and informative session. There was just one question before we hand it over to Raju. The thoughts on approach used for Microsoft Tay, and how will you avoid damage should you have managed it?
Do you want to take that, Sindhu?
What is the question? Can you repeat that?
Thoughts on approach used for Microsoft Tay, and how will you avoid damage should you were to manage it?
I remember. I recall the Thai chatbot that was launched into Twitter, and within I think 24 hours, it was able to kind of I'm just explaining just to understand of the context for everyone. So it learned all the unfortunately all the bad language that was taught to it, and basically it was just learning without knowing anything what the Twitter users were interacting with it, and unfortunately this is a reflection of what our society composition as well. So it quickly became speaking in really bad language, and they had to take it off. So first of all, this is just a demonstration of what I truly believe what ML machine learning would do, and garbage in, garbage out. So I wouldn't elaborate further on what. This is exactly where, if you just look at machine learning as a tool and technology, this is what would happen. But if you are trying to solve a problem, then you have to look at it holistically. And I wouldn't have gone out around this way. So that's all I have to say about this.
I think it ties back to the historical, any model which is built on historical predicting future, which is almost 90%, 95% of AI models today, will have this problem. It will learn very quickly. And if you don't want it to be perhaps a knowledge base, or perhaps the way we learn ethics growing up, we need to put those rules in the system so that those rules are not broken, irrespective of its learning.
Great. I think there are plenty of other questions in the chat, and we can take it over there. Thank you very much, ladies. It was a wonderful session. And now I will hand it over to Raju Srivastav. No, not the stand-up comedian, but a very serious CEO of the Big Data Trunk, a leading corporate training company, and a board member of the Silicon Valley chapter of ASEI. Over to you, Raju.
Thank you, Vatsala. And I can try to do some comedy. Why not? So what a powerful event and power-packed sessions in the last few hours, which we had done. I'm going to quickly share my screen, and let's get going to the final closure and the prize distributions announcements. I had the privilege of doing that. So thank you for being part of this event. And first of all, I would like to thank all our speakers and panelists. What a lineup of speakers. I mean, you can see the range of topics which we have covered in the last few hours only. And if you think about it, I think most of the technical sessions in AI and these things have more technical depth into that. What I really personally liked about this event, it took us from a journey from very layman and simplistic view Mr. Raj provided to the depth of what NLP and other things can provide from Ashish, and the social angle and the AI and the philanthropic angle, and finally the woman panel really nailed it to the closure and brought several different aspects together. So the breadth which we covered, I would really want to thank all our speakers. I know that takes a lot of effort to really put together material, put your time together. So we really, really appreciate your taking the time, sharing your valuable knowledge, insights, and experience with the team. So that's really appreciated. We also want to thank all of our participants to participating in such a wonderful event brought to us by ASEI. ASEI is an American Society of Engineers of Indian origin. It's a non-profit organization with a vision to drive a platform for networking, career advancements, community services, but most importantly, to create the next generation of scientists and engineers. We would like you all to consider becoming a member of ASEI. And the membership is just basically very cheap compared to what other memberships could be. So it's a regular membership is just $30. If you think about it, if you go to a family lunch or dinner, that would be much more than that. A lifetime membership, just $250. And students, we allow membership for free. And what an impact this membership could have. It could help us help in youth empowerment, internships, social initiatives, knowledge sharing, and other sessions like this, which we were able to pack up in a short period of time. So there is a lot which goes out with this kind of membership. So really, really would love to you all to consider and think about being part of the members and help in the community giving back. Also would like to give a quick shout out for our sponsors, O'Reilly and Packet Publishing, for what they have been able to make it possible this event, so that everybody was able to participate for free. And they were also kind enough to share with us and give some giveaways, which I'm going to share now with the team. So stay tuned for that. So all the winners, which I'm going to announce now, please send an email to our AI Summit Chair, Mr. Piyush Malik. And the email to send that is piyushventures@gmail.com. And we'll be also posting this in the blog. So if you missed it or you're not at this moment of time, we'll be able to cover that. I'm going to quickly go through the list. And pardon us if we picked up the name incorrectly. We just took it from the Zoom participant list itself. So the first winner is FAKey. So as I mentioned, please email us at piyushventures@gmail so we can avail your prize and we can get that to you. So I'm going to quickly go to the list. Narayana, who was the second participant, a lot of engaging discussions, great questions by the group to make it really interactive in the Saturday morning, and depending on where you are. Gayatri is our third winner. The fourth winner is Venkat Kanivarapu. Peter Milford, the fifth prize winner. Then we have Shannon Narayan. And pardon me if I'm spelling your name incorrectly or we got this name from the Zoom. So again, Tia Singh is the seventh winner. The eighth winner is Sundar Reshwan. Ninth is Shubhan Rahman. And finally, the last winner is Suprasanna Sarkar. So congratulations to all our winners. And as I mentioned, please send email to piyushventures@gmail, and we'll be sending across your prizes to that particular location. So thank you very much. We are coming to the close of the session. I would really want to thank, and before we do the final closure, I want to just request all our one quick last thing to bring all our participants, the speakers, volunteers, and the members to really come on video so that we can have a photo session. And so I'm going to stop to share. Thank you very much. Take care, and let's do a photo quick shoot of everyone together. Over to you, Vatsala, for the picture and pinning everybody on that.
Thank you, everybody. Ashish, if you can come on screen. Great. Look at your camera, and here we go. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all the speakers. Wonderful engagement. Please continue to stay engaged with us. And thank you all the listeners who are listening. We are recording. This is a great initiative, and this is the start of the ASCI journey with AI. We will do a lot more things with our speakers, and any one of you or any of your companies want to participate in our studies and our engagements, please get in touch with us, any of the board members here. Thank you very much. Good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And have a lovely rest of the day and a great weekend.